we can
Just let me know.
go for it.
All right, thank you. It is 12:05 and we're going to call to order the meeting of the Vermont Community Broadband Board of October 4th, 2021. Board members in attendance in person, Brian Otley, Dan Nelson, Holly Groschner. Laura Sibilia is on her way but not here yet, but we will begin the meeting. And I'll take a request for agenda change request and vote to approve the agenda. Are there any changes to the agenda?
Yes, Madam Chair, I'd like to add the board's review of the proposed conditions on approval of the Maple Broadband pre-construction grant application submitted by Brian Otley and myself. And I'd like to add a standing agenda item to review our parking lot.
Excellent. Those are great ideas. Any other agenda changes?
Is the first point Holly made not the 12:45 agenda item?
That's what I thought was the 12:45.
It is?
So
Oh, it
might
is
just
on the
need to be
universal
clarified.
service.
Report back in working groups.
Oh,
Working group.
I didn't know
Oh,
that
yes.
that was it. Is that it?
Okay,
That was it, yeah.
Oh,
Okay.
okay.
So we'll strike the first one, but we'll continue to keep the parking lot checklist.
You'll make that a standing agenda item.
Okay. Any other comments? Motion to approve?
Moved.
Second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Okay, we are going to move to the executive director update, since Christine is ready for us.
Well, we're going to cover most of it in the meeting, but we are moving forward with the
Let's just let I'm going to interrupt you real quick. Just let the record know that Laura Sibilia has joined us at 12:07. Welcome.
Sorry,
No worries.
Madam Chair.
we have a grant moving through the process with NEK Broadband to connect an additional 230 something addresses. That is part of the CARES grant from last year that's going through the department, but I've been working closely with the department on that because the department wants to comply with whatever processes we have in place since we're inheriting all this. So I think we're going to cover everything else in this meeting, so we can just move forward unless anybody's got any questions.
Okay. Any highlights that you want to make from your weekly update memo?
I don't even remember what it was, so
I'll just give you an opportunity.
okay. Yeah,
Um,
I
Any
guess
other
I should say any
questions?
questions from that. I'll throw it back at the board. But I took Friday off and I was at the wedding all weekend, so I didn't get a chance to.
So when will, I'm sorry, if I missed, when will the NEK grant be considered, or will we vote on that?
You don't need to vote on it.
Okay.
It goes through.
That one's gone.
Okay.
This was CARES Act, so this was still department, but they were nice enough to let us have a lot of input on it.
Excellent. Okay, if there's no other questions of Christine, the executive director, we'll move on to report back from the working group on the universal service and transfer of asset discussion.
I should also note that Steve Hoppercare is here as well as Roger from Waitsfield. We need them.
Okay.
So did everybody receive that in their email?
I honestly did not see that.
Okay. Did
Probably in
staff
my
print it
inbox.
out?
No, we didn't burn it out. I'll be glad. I'll go snag it.
Or I can send it to you and you can post it.
You can send it to me and I can pull it up on the screen.
I'm not connected to
Okay.
internet service
Let me
here.
see if I can find it.
It is copied to you in your email.
It is, okay.
You want me to forward that to anybody?
I just have to.
Are you connected to the network here?
Everybody was on the original distribution, so if it didn't reach
I'm sure it's in the inbox, just it's a matter of timing of getting to everything.
I just have to figure out how to share this and I will do it.
Holly and Brian, do you want to lead the discussion on it before we pull it up?
Well, I think, hang on one second.
Yes.
I have to see it to do it. Okay. So as you recall, there was a general condition on the approval of the pre-construction grant to Maple Broadband. And Brian and I were asked to flesh out what those conditions really are. So the first regards universal service, and this is framed as an estimate at this point. So point one, and you know, really you need to read this just to be sure. I want to make sure that we've quoted the right dollar amount, 2.339,200. But Maple will provide its best estimate of the number of locations that those are un and underserved on the grid in the Act 71 definition that will be connected in the district. That means the whole district. And the percentage of those locations within the WCBT area and the Maple area, as those areas are defined in the Maple operating agreement. Maple further agrees, so that's the first part, an estimate, how many locations in the whole district. And we would like that as an amendment to its grant application to show that we considered universal service as part of the pre-construction grant, since it is a condition in the statute for pre-construction. The second part of this provision, number one, is Maple further agrees to develop a universal service plan for broadband service to locations in the district, including an estimated date for completion of the plan. Now, this is really an addition that is the heart of pre-construction planning. So Brian and I thought that this is an appropriate use of funds, appropriate use of time, and is necessary before we get to the point of reviewing a construction grant. So that was our thought there, right?
Yeah, so, I mean, at a high, it's simply stated, it's, we want an estimate now, best numbers they have now, non-binding. And during their pre-construction work, one of the deliverables we want is an update of that estimate at the time of their construction grant to show us what are the better numbers, and how far can they get to universal service, and in what time frame as part of the construction application. Not holding out the pre-construction funding for this at all. That'll come later. So right now we just want a non-binding estimate. So we've asked and we've had that context, and then we're signaling that when you come back in for construction grants, we want a firmer number or just a confirmation of that original number, whatever you find, and insights as to how close we'll get to universal service and under what time frame with the appropriate contingencies.
Okay.
We think that's a fair ask. Thanks.
Yeah, I agree.
The second, yes.
I can wait till you go.
Okay. The second request is to make a stab at getting closer to data correlations, so we're all on the same, working off the same song sheet. So Maple agrees that the plan will provide, and that means their universal service plan will serve the locations that are mapped by the department and then explain the delta if there's a difference. So they might have more locations, they might have fewer locations, they might not include all the locations in their plan, but they have to tell us why.
Let me, can I make a point on number two? Number two is, it gets down into some thornier issues. And what I would and not that I don't agree with it. What I think we need to do, and I've talked with you, we've been talking back and forth about department versus VCBB, and trying to reconcile this issue between data. And what I'm going to recommend when we talk about the next agenda is we bring in the Joe Flynn and the AOT to present how they present their construction plans and how they do it. They've done a nice model on reporting, which I like, in terms of, I think, how we report progress. But in terms of grant management, what I want to see from is, you know, I'm extending what you're saying even a little further. I want to see kind of a weekly update and how many addresses are connected, confirmation of latency, bandwidth, so that we can say to the public and everybody involved that here's the plan and here's the actual, right? Here's a
So
plan
are we
perspective.
getting into construction phase now?
Yes, that
No,
would
no,
be-
I'm getting into the issue between data that the department owns versus data that we own. So I'm looking for certain data needs that need to be part of a discussion. What I would recommend is that the board put together a working group, maybe you two, to talk about how we're going to manage data. Because I do agree with the statement, but then it gets to the how are we going to do it.
Right, but for these purposes, you're good with number 2 as a condition to the awarding of Maple's pre-construction application.
Yes.
Great.
Okay.
So does the subcommittee feel this addresses Act 71's requirement of universal service? So Act 71 states some things about universal service. If we follow item 1 in your memo, do you feel that we are in compliance with Act 71?
Well,
I'm not asking you as a lawyer, I'm asking you as just committee members of the board.
well, our approach here is to ensure that we consider universal service as part of the pre-construction grant funding. We don't have a full picture in this application of what the universal service plan is, so we're making a plan for having full visibility of the universal service. So the answer to that question from my standpoint is yes.
And that plan, we'll know that plan when they come in for the construction phase. And if for some reason they don't come in for the construction phase, we'll never know that plan, but we also won't be awarding construction dollars.
Exactly.
Right, so one of the deliverables out of the pre-construction funding is a prerequisite to getting the funding is giving us best estimate as it exists today, which is non-binding. And then a deliverable from the pre-construction funding is tightening that up. And when you come back for construction funding, showing what is your plan in terms of the number of locations that will be connected and underserved, how close does that get us to universal service? What is the time frame? And what is the time frame to do that?
I just have,
Sure.
want to make sure we're on the same page. We're actually asking for them to type something up today.
Yes,
Oh, yeah.
I want to see
Okay.
numbers.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a best estimate
Yeah.
at this time, non-binding. In other words,
It's what are they working
we're
from?
never going to come back to them and say, during the pre-construction phase application, you said this number, and now you're telling us a different number. This number they're going to tell us is just the starting point. Now, if the number is 50% of the locations in their district, that's going to give me pause.
Yep, the red flag.
So,
And what I added to that, I did an addendum to that. We're going to have reporting requirements for them set up by the time the construction grant comes.
once they get it, so that they can follow those
Right.
during construction phase.
Yep.
Yes.
So if I can just keep going for a little bit, just to kind of flesh this out and talk it through so that folks that are listening can understand this. So when you move from the pre-construction phase now, like here's an estimate, we get to the construction phase. Is it, you're thinking that they would outline, there may be pockets that they can't get to for X, Y, and Z reason, but it's identified these 3 people we can't get to because of,
I need to identify.
That's
Okay.
exactly what we want to see.
so there will be in the construction phase, potential pockets, at least identified so we know.
And that's,
And these are the reasons why.
and the pre-construction funding is funding them down to that more detailed design. And that will allow them to identify those potential pockets. They bring that to us as an element of their application for construction so that we can consider it.
It's also the case that in the adoption of the DPS locations, we've said here from 2019 or later. So if the department's data pops up in the time frame that is required for them, I don't want them to have to stop. But if they get fresh data we should be, you know, accepting whatever they can work from, but not later than 2019.
I'm going to show my cards a little bit and say during that construction process, whatever addresses are deemed we can't get there, it better be small. And I'm just showing my cards and I'm broadcasting this to the universe for that particular
That's
point.
probably more than I would say.
Okay, so if
Not letting perfect be the enemy of good.
exactly, but if it's a lot of imperfection, if there's a lot of folks left behind, we can't, if it's cherry picked and they're only skirting a few or grabbing a few of the low hanging fruit, that's going to be a problem. So minimize the outliers that we can't get to. I'm just sending that message.
I wouldn't even get subjective of the problem. Like, that's going to be an important data point to us considering the awarding of the construction grants. I don't think this board can be responsible in its duties if we don't know what we're funding for construction. And to know what we're funding, you have to show a plan that reaches whatever commitment level you're willing to make at that time. And if it's, as I said, if it's 50% of the under in your district, that's better than nothing, but it sure doesn't get anywhere close to the universal service hope that we have.
Right.
If it's 98% and there's a couple of pockets that represent the 2% that for very valid engineering and technical reasons, we say, holy cow, those are really a challenge. We may want to award that at 98% and then take the 2%, you know, under a different strategy other than the construction grants that are before us at that time.
I'll go
Yeah.
one step further on all this. The conversation, I'm sorry,
You go right ahead.
the conversation,
To say.
the conversation regarding overbuild is sort of a sister conversation to this whole discussion, right? And if you were going to put forward a construction grant for, let's say, 30% of your district, you would want the corollary universal service plan to be for the whole district and then what the impact was going to be for that 30% in terms of addresses left behind. We need to make sure that we track and don't lose addresses by doing piecemeal granting.
Laura.
So universal, for me, universal is universal. So there may be some that are really expensive and like pulling those out and helping us understand, or even pulling those out and saying, we would propose in these, 10 addresses out of our 5,000 addresses that you allow us to put in place a wireless solution, fine. But universal to me means universal. And with the CUDs, I expect that it will probably mean that to them as well. I mean, these are their neighbors and towns. The other thing that I want to just make sure that we're all on the same page with, because I went back and refreshed my memory on a different thing, is the universal service plan itself. And the universal service plan is for a CUD or only, or for an eligible provider providing universal service in towns that were not part of a CUD June 1st. So then my question is, with regards to Waitsfield Champlain, is whether or not, I just want to make sure, or in a municipality that was not, needs a plan for providing each unserved and unserved location in a communications union district, or in a municipality that was not part of a communications union district prior to June 1st. So when we're talking about Waitsfield Champlain, I think we need to have some agreements when we come back with construction from the municipalities.
How's that? I mean, if the municipalities are part of the district, you're good, right?
So you have, yes, yeah. If there's anything that's happening in Waitsfield Champlain that we would fund, which doesn't appear that there is, but if there is, that we would have an agreement with the municipality, because we could.
Mm-hmm.
So there could be addresses in Waitsfield Champlain if they're not part of Maple, if there's an agreement with that municipality.
The way I read the map in the application, it was very clear that the district was all of Maple.
But we're talking about both still in the dish. So if they come back
Do you have a list
That's
of
right.
towns that have not joined the CUD?
I don't have it in front of me right now.
But does
We have the
such
Does it
information.
exist?
Yes.
It exists?
Yes.
As of June 1st.
Correct.
That is where we'll have to go back and.
Yeah,
update.
is it dozens or is it, how many, like, just?
It's about 85% of the towns in the state are in
Great.
CUDs.
Thank you.
It's like I probably could pull up the number now for you.
Well, this
No,
is
we don't need to
August.
now.
No, it's okay.
We may want to reference it.
We might like to
Yeah,
have
later.
it.
Yeah,
The
later.
fact that it exists is good.
That was to the towns that were not.
Okay, can we keep going?
Yes, absolutely.
Awesome. Now you'll recall that we did review the operating agreement. And so the question is, we don't have any ability to enforce the operating agreement. So the question is, how does the universal service plan interface with the operating agreement itself? So I am referencing section 6.17 here of the operating agreement, which is a very loosely formed, will agree to agree in the future or will agree to collaborate. And in our conversations with the parties, it seemed to me that there was a lot of concern around the pace at which universal service would be achieved. So we're leaving a lot of flexibility for the parties to the operating agreement here. All we're saying is that Maple, the party we can hold responsible for this grant, agrees to modify the operating agreement to include, instead of section 617, a provision in which both parties consent to performance of the plan by a date certain, by terms that are enforceable by both parties. So in other words, they can figure it out, but they have to address it now. And we, Patty, this references your look back to force majeure as a reason that parties can be prevented from achieving that objective. But we have to review this amendment prior to our consideration of applications for construction funding. So that's really the deadline. This is another, get this done before we go to construction funding phase.
So Holly, to be clear, the operating agreement, who are the parties of the operating agreement here?
Maple and Waitsfield Champlain Valley.
Okay, so it's their agreement.
It's their agreement.
So what did what did you mean by the event of force majeure? It has to be identified before the construction grant.
No, that's not what it says. The board understands that the party's performance of the operating agreement is subject to events of force majeure. We're just letting them know. We're not asking you to pull a rabbit out of a hat.
Okay.
That you have a force majeure clause in your contract. We understand that this provision that we're asking for to meet the obligations of the universal service plan will be subject to that force majeure clause. If there is no fiber to buy, or we have a hurricane that takes down the network, or
There's no people to hang the fiber.
or there's an insurrection, just saying.
A lot of violence coming out.
Well, those are force majeure things, right? That those could impact their obligation to perform the universal service plan. And really, generally speaking, what it does is just offer a delay for the duration of the event of force majeure. Okay.
So what exactly are we asking of them to include in their operating agreement?
An agreement to perform the universal service plan by a date certain.
They'll amend that at a future time when their construction plans are better known.
Yeah, so they should be working on the universal service plan together,
Okay.
I would think.
That statement, I would be super happy to say, if we wanted to pass that, vote on that as an action item. Are we doing any action item? This is just a,
We need to agree that this is acceptable, and it says it right in
Yeah,
there.
so number one, we're expecting numbers back.
Okay.
Number two, we're expecting an agreement. Number three, we're expecting an agreement. And number four, we're expecting an agreement.
okay.
So number one is the only thing they need to provide before moving forward with the grant agreement, or I guess I'm trying to get the order of everything.
They need to accept. They need to provide something in one and accept 2 through 3 and 4.
These were drafted so they could be put right into the grant agreement.
Oh, wonderful, great.
Okay, but the first thing they need to provide is this estimate of their number of locations and how many are in each area. And then the final one is one we did talk about that's a separate topic. And this is the one where we've asked that they look to their lenders and section 8086C3 to advise the board whether they can meet lenders' expectations and still implement the default provision that if they should default on this grant, it could be transferred to the assets, the network could be transferred to the state upon that default. And really all we're looking for here is advice and counsel, really.
They agreed to verbally on last week when we spoke to them. I forget the woman's name. She had a great name. What was her name?
Magna.
Magna. That was it.
Magna.
She was gonna go do the research and great confidence that she'd come back with something that makes sense.
Thank you very much. Any other questions of the committee?
So,
Dan?
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
It just occurred to me in this last bullet, you're in a position of providing money. Do you feel that we're covered if they don't come back for funding for construction, that the work product can be recalled under that? So that someone else can we funded this work product, who else can carry this out?
Well,
I think it's really unlikely, but in that.
I was really taken by your comment. I took it on face value, Dan, that what they're producing with the pre-construction grant funds have value. The things that they're doing have value, and that a third party could pick them up, right? So really, I think what's happening here is that we're making an official notice that we're asking for the impact of this provision on their ability to get third-party funding. And that's actually a pathway to either a modification of legislation, but if they can't, if the answer is no lender would consider section 8086C3, then I think we're in a situation where we couldn't give money to anybody if we're going to actually do that. So there's kind of a, what is that called in the law, Laura, where if you can't reasonably implement the law, there's kind of a
Poison pill? I get out of jail free card was really what I was thinking. But we would have to seek counsel on what to do.
Okay.
Yeah, that's.
Laura, do you have comments?
I just wanted to say thank you for working through all of this. I did read this before and I was relieved when I read through all of it. And I appreciate you guys taking that on.
Yep, ditto.
So should we open it to any questions from Maple on this?
Just to make sure they're clear.
I think that's a good idea.
Okay, so I'm gonna take this off the screen right now. And Maple Broadband, do you have any questions?
No, I note that this is not in our record for this meeting, and it's a little bit unfair to ask Maple off the cuff because they've never seen this before.
Oh, they haven't?
They
They
have,
haven't.
They have.
And
they saw the drafts, yes.
they did?
Yes.
Oh, so you forwarded?
Yeah, I forwarded
Okay.
it to them because I didn't want us to keep going and going without.
Okay, good.
Want to identify problems in advance.
Anybody say,
So do I have the floor?
You have the floor, and I'm also gonna spotlight Roger as well.
Excellent.
You want both on the spot.
I'll try to make it fast. So, yes, Rob forwarded this on a few days ago, and we reviewed it. I think I'm interpreting item 1 a little bit different than what I'm hearing you say, so I want to make sure we're clear on that. I see that as one requirement, but I think you actually have it, you're treating it as 2 requirements. One is the listing of universal service, unserved and unserved locations in Maple Broadband's territory and in WCBT's territory. That's one. And the other one is a universal service plan. So when I had read it, I assumed it was one requirement, which is you want a universal service plan, and we will be prepared to provide a universal service plan prior to requesting for construction grant money. But I think what you want is you want me to provide, you want us to provide with you both unserved and underserved for both Maple Broadband and WCVT territory. And until you have that in hand, you cannot release your precondition. Is that a fair representation?
That's how I read it. That's why it's framed as an amendment to your application.
Yeah, okay. So,
And Steve, remember, it's your best estimate at those numbers at this moment. We're not asking you to go deep dive research a bunch of things. We're saying, tell us what you know, best information at hand right now.
Something you should be able to provide probably by the end of the day, based on how I'm hearing.
well, and truth be told, we already provided those numbers in our grant application. So I think you have it from us. You just don't have it from WCVT. But it's easy enough for us to work with Roger, provide you with an updated application of that section of our application, and to put that behind us. So I think we're on the same page there.
Steve, I'm really hopeful that I just didn't see it, but I didn't see it. So if you could compile it in one supplement to the application, that would be really awesome.
Okay. And if I could, so my ultimate focus today is to dispatch these items so that today you can inform us that we are we are fully approved. That's what I'm looking for. So I guess my follow-up question is if WCVT and I provide you with that supplement today, is that eliminate that requirement? Are you then going to be okay with us proceeding?
It eliminates 1A.
Right. Okay. Yep. And then 1B is something that you're not asking us to provide you with today. You're asking us to provide it with to you, and you're not going to proceed. You're not going to allow us to proceed onto a construction grant until we have provided you that that plan for both our territories to your satisfaction. So we're on the same page there. Adoption of DPS locations. We're on board with that. Happy to do it. If the ask is that would probably be provided to you concurrent with our provision of the construction grant application, we can do that. And if you need it sooner than that, I think we can do that too. It sort of feels similar to 1A from my perspective. Amending the operating agreement. WCVT and I reviewed that question today. We understand that that's going to kind of be a prerequisite of what needs to be done. I think we take a minor exception to the force majeure reference. There's so many aspects of the work that we have to do that is out of our control that fall well below that threshold of force majeure. Inadequate bucket trucks, inadequate talent, inadequate materials, inadequate funding. So pretty much everything that we need to do necessitates a smooth implementation. And so I think it's almost a given that some aspects of our commitments are going to slip. We need to all be prepared to be more nimble about adjustments to the schedule to recognize the realities of the market right now, which are really, really challenging. So we're okay with the principle behind amending the operating agreement, and we will do so. I've already kind of cooked up some ideas on how to address it, but I think we need to be thinking about what is reasonable in light of the currently tight marketplace for so many aspects of the resources that we need to do the work that we need to do. So we're on board with that, and then on the transfer on default. You shouldn't be singling out Maple Broadband for that. This is really a requirement for all of the CUDs. We actually raised this with our consultants, ValleyNet, and Stan Williams very vociferously insisted on taking this on himself. They're proceeding to a bond offering very soon, and this could disrupt their activities severely. So we'd be respectfully asking you to relieve us of item 4 and assign that to ValleyNet.
It's a grant condition that will probably show up
many times over in many grants. And in Valleynet, we have no truck with them as a board. No one has approached us from Valleynet. They're not sponsoring a grant application. I don't understand how we could interface with them, but I leave that to my colleagues here. One of the things that is interesting to me is that this is about default. And the question I think we're seeking is there a way to not default that gives comfort to lenders, or a way for lenders to work with an organization that is threatening to be in default that solves the problem for them? We're looking for a creative solution. And if there's no creative solution, then we'll probably be looking for legislation. But we're asking the question. It's the law right now. It's not for us to bypass it.
And if they ask the question to Valleynet and Valleynet comes up with a solution and they report to us, they're in full compliance.
Sure.
The reason for my comment is that Maple Broadband collectively have worked with the CUD model for a year. EC Fiber and Valleynet have been doing this for 10 years. They've in many cases, as you well know, they're the organization that's created the model under which we're operating. And so we can do the best we can, but you're going to find a better, more elegant solution if you engage resources that have a more in-depth experience in this field.
Well, I would just say that EC Fiber has taken a slightly different track, which is they've been raising private money for, and we are fixing to dump a whole bunch of public money here. So that's just a little bit of a difference.
Well, and I also think that we took you seriously when you said that you were seeking financing from Middlebury Bank, from Middlebury College. I think there was somebody else who you'd approach. And since there's third-party lenders out there, it's not just about the bond bank. And so we're looking for information that helps.
And I would just say to my colleagues, if we are able to talk to Stan, about this, and I would love to. It'd be great, good resource.
It's an issue that has to be addressed, whether it's through you or whether it's through Valleynet.
You cannot fail on this condition. There's no way for you to fail on this condition except to not do it.
If I can, Magna Dodge would like to say something clearly. I want to defer to her.
Well, I'd like to say that it was interesting. Stan jumped on it immediately because he also added that EC Fiber is planning another offering by the end of the year, and that his immediate reaction is this will stop things in its tracks. We've got to get Primer involved, and we've got to get it solved. He has more of a sense of urgency about it right now than even we do. And I think he's going to get he's going to have a better response to you, a more reasoned, complete response than we will have by simply talking to a couple of folks that we're talking to who've had no experience with this before, in fact, have not had experience with CUDs before. So I really do think, not that I'm skirting the work, but I do think a fuller response will be coming from EC Fiber and Valleynet because of their experience, as Steve mentioned, but also because this is part of their funding plan for the rest of this year.
Great. It seems like something staff should just follow up and take advantage of, Stan.
Yes,
Really.
I'm in total agreement.
It sounds like one solution fits all, so.
Exactly.
All right.
I do note, just for everybody's comfort, that EC Fiber is not a grantee at this time. And it could go to the bond bank and this condition does not apply. So the question is, will they apply in the future, and to what extent would they be in material, you have to be in material default for this provision to come in. And so it is a question, and frankly, it's kind of a legal mess. But, and I understand why Stan would hate it, but the fact of the matter is that it's actually not going to threaten their bond offering right now.
I would ask, how do you define material? I mean, I think it's very tough if you just have this open-ended material. How is the material going to be defined?
Well, and maybe that's a policy, and maybe one way around this is that this board could discern what a material default means for purposes of transfer of assets.
I think that's going to be key for anybody to try to respond to you in a meaningful way.
Would you have a recommendation on that, Magna? What would make sense
No.
for the definition?
No, I think that's something that's, it's in the legislation, but material means so many different things to so many different people. I don't know whether the board should take on the job of defining what material is in advance so that a potential lender would come in and know what we're talking about. I mean, each one of them could think about material in a different way.
We'll certainly look to Stan to see what he has to say about that.
We can also speak with, I guess, Jim Anderson at the bottom. That-
Yeah.
I think
The
it
two
might
of
be,
them.
Yep.
actually, if you're going to take Stan's testimony, if we had it here in the board.
Okay, and Jim Anderson as well.
Yeah, I was gonna say, we need some expertise on this. to
Okay.
help
And
us.
Paul Giuliani might offer up what material default should mean when he's talking about a bond. That would be another way to look at it.
Do you want to put that on the future agenda?
Yep, yep.
It's on the parking lot list.
Thank you, Holly. Steve, you're muted.
So, thanks for your consideration, and we understand about item 4 there. We're as passionate about it as we can possibly be, and we're gonna have our fingers in it as much as we can. So we'll certainly participate in the effort to the degree possible. But and we are on regular meetings with Valiant, and so we'll know what you know probably at the same time. So I think we're fine with item 4. I think I'm finally left with the sense that really what you need from us now, which will there's actually one item that you need right away from us in order to give us unfettered approval, is a provision, a separate document of unserved and underserved addresses in our respective territories, and with a commitment from us, and I'm going to ask Roger to speak in a moment, but a commitment from us to the remainder of the requirements specified under 1, 2, and 3. And that, is that consistent with your expectation?
I think it is. I think that's what we're looking for, Steve.
Exactly.
I do think it's important for you to note, well, you keep talking about this as, one area versus and the other area, that we really wanted to telegraph the message that as the grantee, you are responsible for the district and universal service in the district. And that's an important piece.
Which is not Roger's area. When it
It's
is not.
It's the whole thing.
It's the whole thing.
No. it's
Yeah.
not.
Maple Broadband has a footprint that includes part of WCBT's ILEC territory, and we recognize fully our responsibility as it relates to our member towns that are in WCBT's ILEC territory. We're fully respect.
Got
And again, I want to give Roger an opportunity to speak to these to make sure you understand, you've got a full understanding of our commitments. Roger.
Just to follow on to what Steve said, we are fully aware of all the conditions in 1, 2, and 3. We'll meet all of them along with Steve so that he can submit a complete application representing the whole Maple broadband area, much as he did, much as Maple did for us with the NTIA grant that we applied for earlier this year, in which we made it to the second round on.
Yeah, I wanted to congratulate you that I just
Great.
received the email showing that both you all and Southern Vermont have made it to the next step.
Awesome. Congratulations.
We're pretty excited. We're hoping.
We are too.
All right, do we have to take action on this? To me, I interpret that Steve and Roger have heard the conditions of the grant. They have to follow up on 1 through 4, and they're going to follow up through staff on those items.
And those items are going to be incorporated into their grant agreement.
Yes.
So do we recommend funding with those agreements?
We've already
We-
approved the
So we
funding.
recommended funding last week.
Yeah, we just have to have
So there's no
a-
action. Is there action required today?
I don't know what needs to do to incorporate that language into their agreement, but if no.
You know, here's a question, a parliamentary question. I'm going to put it to you, Brian.
Oh.
So it was your motion that approved the grant
Provisionally.
provisionally with some conditions. Could we ask you to amend the motion to include these conditions? So that it's really clear that those were the conditions that you intended? Or do we not need to embellish your motion?
Is this purely clarification of our motion last time? I just want to make sure we don't have to do another vote
So,
here.
I thought the motion was the work product that you two worked on.
So the motion was conditional approval pending this work product.
Right.
And the acceptance of it by Maple.
Okay,
And once they accepted it and provided whatever information it requested, they're fully approved.
Right, I move. Let's see if I can state this. I move we reiterate our approval to, what's their official name? The Maple area,
so the
Maple-
broadband.
Maple Broadband, for a grant approval in the amount of 2.3392, subject to the conditions outlined in Holly and Brian's email shared on September 30th, 2021, and further vetted with Roger and Steve as representatives of Maple Broadband,
Second.
period. Okay, thank you. All those in, or any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that way it's on the record.
Aye.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Roger and Magna. Thank you.
Thank you.
That way they've got crystal clear. They have their 2.3392.
With one document.
Excellent. Okay. Anything else on item 3 in our agenda? All right, if not, let's go to construction grant program, decision timeline, work group appointment, review, staff discussion. Want to tee this up?
Sure.
Kristen?
Yes, so this document, we want to talk about all the decisions that need to be made before the issuance of the construction grants.
So we're looking ahead now.
We're looking ahead
several
now.
months, we're in review of construction applications, and this is basically a framework to evaluate this.
Yep, and in this document, we separated two sets of, we'll call them policies or recommendations. One is we think staff, we call them a staff decision. And then the green ones are the ones we think we need board help on. That basically say,
I think a better way to frame it is the things that are green, we think there needs to be a working group. The other things are where we took a good stab at it, and we're hoping that we could come to consensus really quickly and move on. We'll see what happens though, but this was trying to flush out answers. There may be some things in here that are a little controversial.
yeah, so maybe go to the next slide.
Okay, so you want to take a lead at the timeline, Christine?
Sure.
Oops, I apologize for the slide I suggested. Covers a little bit, but it's not.
So this gets to carrying further of what Rob said. We're introducing these policy decisions here, and then would like to assign working groups. Yeah, that's just a repeat of what I just said. And we might have to have some executive session for some of this. But we have the fiber pre-purchasing, we've got a separate agenda item, so ignore that.
But the point is we want to try to issue the RFP before the end of the year for construction grants, is what, according to this timeline. If we could do it sooner, we could do it sooner, but you'll see there's a lot of decisions to make.
And the timeline after we issue the RFP, I mean, that's up to each CUD to manage for themselves, right? We're not imposing timelines on them. We're just letting them know what our timeline is for our activities.
Yes.
Great.
Yeah, and we can make a board decision on whether we want rolling or whether we want, of how we want to accept applications.
Yeah.
Will be
And just so I'm clear, like, I think this is obvious, but I'll state it. We do not expect any applicants for construction grants who have not applied for and received pre-construction grants.
I'm just about to go there. This is also a message to the towns. If you, in Act 71 identifies towns that have not been part of Act. So many of the towns have come to us already and said, when are you going to give us the money? And my message to them has been, look, we've got to develop the policies first before we can issue this money. So these policies apply to those towns as well.
And eligible providers
Yeah.
is who has to apply. And there's one challenge that a town itself cannot apply, which is something we may want to look back at in Act 71. So, but for any private provider that's an eligible provider, they have to have a universal service plan that covers an entire town.
And so they could apply for construction grants without having applied for pre-construction grants.
Yes, they're not eligible for pre-construction.
Right.
So-
Can you help me? I'm sorry. Can you help me, Rob? I don't remember seeing that a town can apply.
Yes,
A town,
that's,
It's in here?
it's in definitions, universal
Oh.
service plan.
Okay,
Universal service plan is a CUD or for a CUD territory or for a municipality working with a provider.
okay.
but it would be
To
the
provide
provider applying, I believe.
Each address, and each I think means every, not most.
And we'll go through that. We go through the entire the entire section when
But
it
I'm
comes to
checking.
construction grants. But that's our goal, is to have a construction RFP out sometime in December.
And Rob, you have
How
about
many subcommittees, or, how many committees did you anticipate? I count 5. Is that true?
well, they can be incorporated in the same committee.
Yeah.
We discussed that.
What's the count?
I don't have the count offhand. We're gonna go through it and we'll decide.
I've
So,
already recommended one working group to identify the data.
gosh.
So that's again.
Yeah, so this is just a timeline of all the board meetings between now and the end of the
Is
year.
October 18th should be, that October, isn't that,
It's October 18th.
okay, yeah, got it.
So we don't need to go through this, or maybe we do need to go through this.
No, I just want to stick a pin in special meeting to review grant proposals. And I would love to have a sense from you all of when we're gonna have a pile up.
I
Because
think,
I'm guessing that we probably do need one, but how that will work with timing. Maybe not to discuss that right this moment, but
Is that pre-construction grant
these are
proposals?
pre-construction
Yeah.
proposals. That's-
So October 18th, here's what we're hoping for October 18th. We're recommending that we have an all-day meeting, run it from 9 to noon, lunch break for an hour, come back 1 to 3. And we've got several agenda items, including grant approval. We're hoping we have those slew of grant approvals by the 18th. We've been asking the CUDs to come back to us when they expect to have those applications in, but we haven't heard, they haven't responded to us yet.
Yeah, things shifted a little bit after seeing the meeting with Maple last week. Some people slowed down a little bit and wanted to provide us in advance with all the questions we're going to answer, which we
What a
appreciate.
good idea.
Yeah, they may have slowed things down.
So and Madam Chair, this might be a question I direct to you. I'm hearing this, anticipating a pileup and anticipating doing it all in one meeting. And I'm just concerned that we can't walk into a meeting and read all the documents, look at everything. It really is dependent on the timing of receipt of information and doing a good job.
Yeah, we've already set those requirements.
Yeah.
Remember we said we have 7 days for staff to respond, 5 days for the board. We will provide you 5 working days ahead of time, the documentation.
So what I would like to do is stick to a 2-week schedule for meetings. And whenever they come in, they're
do
up
what
for
we
the
can.
next meeting in order to get this group together, we all have jobs and other things going on. Every 2 weeks we will meet. We've committed to that. And that's gonna be our opportunity to review grant requests.
And so you just said no to this proposal of an all-day meeting.
I don't see how we can fit this in. I'm trying to get our schedules to mesh.
Yeah, I think the 2-week rhythm works, Patty. I totally agree, as long as And I don't think we should be expected at the meeting to be reviewing information for the first time. Like,
We
I
get-
want to see this
agreed.
stuff ahead of time.
Yeah,
Exactly.
you already put those requirements in
I'm not-
place.
The board is not scoring, staff is doing the scoring
Right.
review and measuring it for completeness, right?
Well, in for pre-construction, it's not much scoring.
Exactly.
Yeah,
that's
but I
what
think
we
you're
are.
plowing old ground here. You already said you need to see these 5 working days ahead.
No, I know, but the meetings are not going to be spent reviewing the materials. The meetings are going to be spent discussing exceptions or questions and refinements of the materials that we've already read.
Right, yeah, I think we're saying the same thing.
So the 18th
Yeah.
is 2 weeks, and I heard Christine say she was
That means-
proposing a whole day meeting for the 18th.
Yeah,
As opposed to an
and that
additional
means, just to
meeting.
clarify, you will get the materials 5 working days ahead.
Yeah.
of that
Including
meeting,
your review of them.
Including your review.
Yeah, my plan is as soon as the applications come in to forward those to you, so you have as much time, and I'm expecting a few in the next few days, if not before this meeting is over.
Yeah, it's hard to dedicate a full day when we don't have the pileup yet. So I'm not willing to commit to a meeting that I don't have a pileup, because I think with the 2-week schedule and the half-day meetings, maybe we can get through it without a pileup.
Oh, yeah.
So I think it depends. I was just looking at how much time we spent at the first application, but that was the first application.
Absolutely.
So,
Yeah, and we're gonna get clear, as we said, that they've slowed down in order to comply with this, so we should get clear applications. Okay, I think we're good.
Yeah, so just to be clear, we're going to stick to the board schedule, half-day meetings. There's no way, we're just going to stick to that. One question on your outline, just for clarification, is November 14th supposed to be November 15th? This is in the,
whatever's the Monday, I apologize if
okay,
it's,
just to be clear that we're not going to come in Sunday.
nope, we're not seeing any of you on Sunday.
Mm,
So
Okay.
that is an error that I will adjust people.
And we're sticking to the afternoon as opposed to the morning.
Yes.
Okay. Great.
So this was just breaking it through different topics. We can return to this after we go through and see what we do need working groups on, what we can make decisions today. But the point of showing this was more just that it's the schedule is packed between now and releasing the RFP. So a lot of this work will ideally be done in working groups where you're reporting back, we're discussing, we're moving on whenever is possible. So I apologize for the colors here. I hope it's not blinding anybody.
Can we just go, I have a couple
Sure.
of questions on the meeting agendas. First one under October 1st. So you had, third bullet point, equitable allocation of funds and accounting for RDOT. What does that mean?
We're gonna get to that later in the presentation,
Okay.
in terms of what it is, but it's, that's really the formula for distributing the funds. How much is available for each CUD? How do we count RDOT addresses? But we'll get there.
That's in the below stuff?
Yeah, it's in the below
Okay,
stuff,
great.
yes.
Okay.
But these represent things that you want feedback on today.
Well, this was I'm hoping that you'll vote to appoint working groups to address these issues. I would be shocked if we can figure out how to determine the equitable allocation of funds and what to do about RDOF in 15 minutes. I welcome that, but I'd be shocked.
We will come in with
Your options,
recommendations.
Rob.
It's the only way.
No, I'm good. I'm just saying, okay, I get it now. Okay.
Sorry to get down where Rob was.
Okay, so we go back here. So the way we set this up was we made everything that's highlighted in yellow is just a staff recommendation. It's not perfect. There may be different options within there, but these are items where we're hopeful we may be able to make decisions as a full board rather than going to a working group. And in some cases, we may just be able to accept what's there.
And I think the first bulletproof universal service plan, you answered that. You've got that.
Well,
I just want to be clear though, like, I don't think it's the board's job to tell the CUDs, you shall have 100% coverage. I think it's the board job to inquire to the CUDs what coverage they're going to deliver and then decide what we do with that. Right? I don't think we should be telling the CUDs what to do. We can only judge what they're going to do against our obligations around the funding.
Yeah, except Act 71's defined this.
So that's my question. So,
I think the plan has to be 100%.
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
so that's, it would be great to be black and white on that. So
Yeah.
that's the stance we want to take.
That's the law.
Hmm?
Exactly,
So-
that's the law. It's,
So I look at this first bullet and, okay, I know I have editoritis and I'm nitpicky as can be, but this is too many words. I don't really care what their mission statement says. I don't really care that this confidential phase build out for, I'd say they need a universal service plan to address 100% of the locations. They do. Because this doesn't say, well, at pre-construction phase, they need this. We've already done that in the RFP. You're talking about what is our objective here? And it's a plan.
Yeah, it's more than objective. It's trying to provide some clarification on what we need and what we expect.
Okay, there's no clarification in that bullet point. Then,
So the first, the communications unit can show their,
How do they show proof of the universal
Yes,
service
that's
plan
what
is the
I-
objective here?
And you've addressed that. This is kind of like, we don't need to discuss this.
The pre-construction, we have not addressed showing proof of the universal service plan at all. We have.
Yeah, but you put it in the requirement of the
we
grant.
say they have to come up with one and then we have to
Yeah, that's
approve
right,
it.
that's
But
right.
what is it? We didn't say.
Oh, okay.
and shouldn't we give them flexibility to define that? Examples could be mission statement, business plan, presenting. These are examples of things that,
Yeah.
that could be used by the VCBB to evaluate
Like
that.
but I'm sorry, I'm interrupting you. And I'm feeling fairly emphatic about the fact that I can't approve construction funding grants based on a mission statement to serve 100%. We've been in the state, we have been saying that for 20 years.
But also it says presenting a confidential phase build out for all addresses in the operating.
we can cross out some of these, like if the mission
So,
statement is
yeah,
not enough.
we're recommending that they include that in everything they
I
do.
think a universal, what we're really looking to do is to define what a universal service plan is, right?
Well, I think it's defined.
What proof of a universal
Yeah.
service plan is?
Okay.
Okay, and that's that
I mean,
they go hand in hand.
Yeah, well, we know what a universal service plan is. It's
Do we?
100%, yes, it's
Well-
defined.
Okay, I'm just saying, have we
We'll
got
agree to that.
consensus?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but all I'm looking for, tell me, I want to see, there's a handful of metrics I want to see. How many locations in your
Yeah.
district, right? Just, I don't care broadband, non-broadband, just how many locations, grid connected is the definition, right?
Yeah.
And then I want to know how many are served today, which to me is 25.3 or higher, because that's the definition of FCC broadband. How many are not served by broadband today? So that'd be less than 25.3. And then I'd also like to know, out of that less than 25.3, how many are 4.1 or less, which is the worst of the worst, right? And then taking those numbers, I'm focused on the less than 25.3. I want to know how many of them, what percentage of those are you going to reach through this construction proposal? Yeah, and I hope that equals 100%.
There's a gap.
Yeah,
What's my gap?
no, well,
What's your plan
So I-
for reaching
so I would say-
100%?
that's exactly it. What's
And
the plan
then-
to reach 100%? Not how many can you reach, it's what's the plan
Yeah,
to reach
Okay,
100%.
great. You stated.
But you're defining the starting point. Yeah, it's 25.3 and less. Yes.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
actually
that's
been. defined. We
underserved,
don't even
Right,
have to
they're
cover
just,
it.
that's what he's stating.
So you guys wrote that down, right? Because
Yeah, what's
that
the,
was-
so
I have it.
simply
It was-
stated,
plan?
what's the plan for reaching 100%?
What's the
Of
plan?
the less than 25.3.
Okay, yeah.
But you have to state these other things, that's a precondition.
And the conditional phased build out for all underserved addresses, I think is what we want.
That's true.
That's what we want. We want to see that you know what the, that you have a plan for building out to all unserved addresses. That's what we want.
Now, is it true that we'd like to see that reflected in the operating agreement? Of course. The operating agreement should be a baseline condition of an the service plan should be a baseline condition of the operating
If they
agreement.
have an operating agreement.
Yeah, I think the
If-
agreements are gonna be different, like the Waitsfield, the Maple may be unique among all the CUDs.
But the operating agreement should ensure that they're operating consistent with the universal service plan put out by the CUD. because otherwise there could be other priorities.
The universal service plan is a plan to build. It's not a plan to operate.
Right, but wouldn't want a disconnect in those two. Let's take EC Fiber for an example. EC Fiber has an operating agreement with its vendor, and included in that is build out, reconstruction, maintenance, and other operating items. So if I have $1, I could spend it on new builds, I could spend it on rebuilds, I could spend it on maintenance, I could spend it on operational upgrades. I think if there's an objective for universal service here, and these funds are going to support the construction and operation of a network, we need to know that the operating agreements at least acknowledge the terms of the universal service plan.
Yeah, that was our thinking.
So I'm agreeing with you on that one, but I'm just saying what those two words at the end mean.
So the conversation and the words don't line up.
Right.
And I'm maybe not concerned, but do we either take this offline and do another working group and remedy that, or do we do it right here, right now? And-
Well, why don't we let staff rework it?
Okay, so
Yeah,
then,
I hear this as your working document.
Yeah, we
Yes, this is a working
don't want you to have a working group on this.
thank you. Okay, so then,
Yeah.
Ryan's put that so clearly,
Yeah,
and I just want to make sure it got captured.
It did.
Okay,
We will come back
Okay.
with corrected words. That's exactly what we wanted out of this.
okay.
And if you need notes, I read notes too.
Okay.
So the second bullet point under there is so this is not for CUDs. So this is for other eligible operators. So first, if you're an eligible operator operating within a CUD, you need a letter of support from them that it's part of the universal service plan. The question comes into if you're operating outside of a CUD. The way the legislation is written, it says for the entire community. If it happens to be a telephone company, I'm going to use the example of Wethersfield right now. Their town is served by Consolidated, TDS, and VTEL. So no single one of those is going to serve the entire town. So that's why I substituted Wire Center in there. I don't know if that's something we could do or if that's a legislative change that's going to cause some challenges.
So
I'm having a hard time. So there's 3 providers. We have unserved addresses.
Yes.
So one of those providers would be going to the municipality probably and
Right.
coming to us with a plan for all of the underserved addresses.
But traditionally, incumbent telephone companies don't build outside of their service area. So in this case, TDS
see.
is likely not to build into Consolidated and vice versa.
I see.
So how do we address that situation when it comes into a town? Since it wouldn't be a universal service plan for an entire town, but for their wire center, for their addresses in the town.
It
This is
doesn't
right next to
actually say an
VTEL, isn't it?
entire town.
Yeah.
If you're looking at the definition of universal service plan, it says, or in a municipality. And it's not, so all it has to be is in a municipality that's not part of a CUD. And the universal service plan would then state, well, this is CCI and this is VTEL and we're addressing this other part. And, I think they would have to make a universal service plan that shows what's going on in the town.
Who is they that would have to make
The
the
grant
universal service plan?
applicant. The grant applicant. If it's
So if there's 3, this has got to be very unique. If there's 3 providers in one town, I mean, is that anywhere else in the state
oh,
I
yeah.
We have 2 providers in towns.
There's a lot of places where it's 2 providers.
that are not members of a CUD?
Yes.
Yeah.
So, and then you can also,
So, but I think you're onto it. I thought you were doing good there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just think,
You're that point is, it's in a municipality. So that
I don't think,
this does, you don't think that's what we,
I don't think that's what it says.
let's do the homework. I'm happy to be wrong. Would love it.
where are you in?
I'm looking at the definition, which
It's
is,
on page 8 of the bill.
people at home, we're looking at Act 71.
Number 12 in the
Bring
definitions.
it up on the screen.
Yeah, so, providing each unserved and underserved location in a communication union district or in a municipality that was not part of a communications union district prior to June 1. So I'm just saying there's a way to address this. If you're an eligible telco and you're in,
Okay, I'm gonna cede the vagueness of that in that place.
Thank you.
was that kind of a throwdown a little bit?
No, it was like,
Just a question to the board. I see that Roger Nishi has a question now. I don't know if it would help clarify as for one of those
Yeah.
companies, or if we should
yes,
wait now and do it now.
Yeah.
Okay, Roger, go ahead, unmute yourself.
always love to
Sorry,
be
it should be.
educated.
Yeah, it could help us solve it.
So in regard to what's being discussed, I'll give you an example. The town of Bolton would like us to approach the VCBB in an application to serve, to help build out their unserved and underserved areas. We don't serve the whole town of Bolton, though. There's portions of it that are 2 miles away from our exchange boundary, and it would be very costly for us to get to the few other customers that are on the other side of their town. And so I think what needs to happen in this instance is the town we either need to work with the town to try to figure out how to include those, but in this instance, it really makes more sense for the town to I think, work with the other provider as they can serve those areas more cost effectively.
Yeah, so I mean, I think the problem that we're trying to solve in general with Act 79 is it's too expensive in most of Vermont to build out. And so that is helpful, Roger, but it also worries me because then we're just, we're setting up these pockets. Of course, they've decided not to join a CUD.
Well, so your counterpoint is that really want the towns to do a universal service plan for their town. Is that what you're saying?
Well, that's
I have a
technically
different
what it
view on that.
says.
So like if you have a town, I'm calling it Town Green, okay? And you have one telco that has this area covered, but they don't have that little area covered. And this town, and this telco has this other area covered, but they don't have this little area covered. And I'm not even addressing the balance of what you're seeing here. The question is, does this telco have to show the universal service plan for the entire town within its boundaries when its service area is this, or just for those areas or locations under the act that are not addressed within their service territory? And I think that's a matter of coming to us and saying, is this reasonable? For $500,000, we could get the 15 people at the end of that road that we don't serve today. If we create this kind of expectation that they have to provide for the entire town, we will create a barrier to any eligible telco to come forward. And one of the things I think we have to do that will help solve this problem is we need to know what the and underserved addresses are in this town.
Well,
We do.
So I think there's flexibility in the vagueness, as I said. But I can tell you that the intention was that Town Green would be the coordinator and not the blue or the red provider.
But is the town an actual eligible applicant? I thought it was that it had to be a small telco. And that was one of the challenges that Christine and I have identified.
But that the town would be kind of pulling it together. Again, I think there's space, but I'm worried about.
Well, no, I think I agree. That's the tension that Rob and I have been talking about.
Right, because, right, so, this guy's coming in, and so Holly, I think your point, I'm stuck in this chair, your point would be, we're not gonna make these guys figure out the plan over here.
Right.
This may never get done, and everything around them will be done, so.
So the relationship that's already been demonstrated with Maple, I think, can address this with multiple partnerships. So if the town takes that on.
If the town takes it on, but
So they have
that's,
a choice of joining CUD or
Yeah.
taking it on themselves if they want access to the grant money to solve the community.
We don't
100%, I'm 100% with you on that, but that's not what I think we're talking about. What I think we're talking about is Blue coming in with an application and saying, in my municipality that has multiple providers in it, in my part, I'm gonna do. Which is
So-
not the same thing that you're saying, I don't
So
think.
you're saying, Laura, that in fact, the plan would not be universal for Town Green? Because you haven't addressed all the addresses by that.
Saying
town.
Laura Sibilia, that's what Laura Sibilia would say. But I think the wording,
It's a little loose.
Well, we did word it the way, we did word it by telecom provider. So just to let you know that we looked at this for yes, and this is a very nuanced debate, you know, the problem with our recommendation is the entire town may not get covered. The problem with the alternative is we may not get applications at all.
the literal approach that we started with 79 was, no one's coming to save you, town. Work with your other towns, neighbors, come together, towns, and, let's build something public. Hopefully your private partners there will work with you.
And you just heard, this is not really that nuanced. I think the board can make a decision on this. You don't need a working group. It is as simple as what's been presented here. It's a simple choice. You've got one choice. You may not have towns come back. The other choice, you may not get the town entirely covered.
I think if we say it's towns, that if somebody's motivated to get funding in that town, that they're gonna figure it out.
Well, towns aren't eligible applicants.
So in
Well, that's the
Weathersfield,
challenge.
so I think Weathersfield, what is Consolidated gonna say? Well, we're not doing Weathersfield? Probably, maybe. Is the other telecom gonna say, we're not doing it? Maybe not. Maybe they'll say, let's talk to the town. Let's see if we can put together a plan to do all of the unserved addresses.
But they're still unlikely to provide service and build outside their service area. That's the whole thing. Like, if it was towns coming to us to apply for funds and that they have worked it out with their multiple providers, that's a more direct way for having the whole town covered. But this is just the challenge with access.
How many towns?
It's the same list
How
of
many-
non-CUD towns, right? But although not.
No, how many towns have actually asked for this? Are you
We
talking
got-
one or
No, we
10?
got
or-
about four at this point.
Four.
Are they all around VTEL?
There's some towns around it, but this is just in general in situations where it's like easy if in a town is entirely Waitsfield Champlain or is entirely, well, the whole Ayrshire is consolidated. With the way the legislation is written, it's one thing, but when it's divided among multiple providers, it's more challenging.
I think we say no.
Can I ask this question that is related to what you're talking about? I'm looking at section 8086, which is page 16 of Act 71, A, and it says there's established broadband construction grant program to finance broadband projects of eligible providers. Where does it say?
Eligible providers is defined way back in the beginning.
But that's not including CUDs.
CUD is one of the eligible providers.
It is.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay. I'm panicking too easily. And an eligible provider does mean a CUD, a small communications carrier, which is also defined, and an internet service provider working in conjunction with the CUD. And it makes no reference to towns. This could be a legislative cleanup that we request. I mean, we should, I don't think we should make eligible providers of any stripe. No, CUDs have to deal with their districts, but small communication carriers as defined, they have this problem. But if you had a municipality that had gone through the effort, not that they're eligible for a pre-construction grant, but if they went through the effort to make a universal service plan and got everybody on board,
One of their
we
providers
would want
could fund it.
them.
Well,
We
one of their providers would be
Would
eligible
be-
to come in.
would come in, yeah. And certainly that would be a grant criterion that we would look at. Is who they got in tow. The grant applicants.
So maybe it would be helpful for us to bring it back to what Roger was talking about, the Waitsfield Champlain, where they serve the vast majority of the town. There's one part of the town that's served by Consolidated elsewhere. Are we saying that they could not apply for providing universal service in all of their areas unless they figure out a plan for what Consolidated is?
Yeah, I mean,
Consolidated
that's,
territory?
but that's the current status. Like, that's the default status before CUDs, is what we're talking about now. It's funding providers in their territories.
So let's
But
just, we could say that's a lower priority than funding CUDs, but
Or municipalities.
I guess I don't see as much of an issue if they're serving all of their addresses. If they were only gonna serve a 10th of their addresses, I don't see that as qualified, but I see if they're gonna universally build out all the addresses that are part of their service territory, that does qualify.
Is there a real problem that's on the table right now? Like, is there a
I think
real
the real-
application?
It's Waitsfield.
Well, there's no
Yeah.
application yet, but we already heard from Roger, that's what they would like to do, is they would like to build out all of Bolton, but they wouldn't
hit all the addresses.
hit all
So
the
is
addresses.
Bolton a CUD town or not a CUD?
Not-
It's
town?
not a
CUD.
CUD town.
I thought what
Maybe
we
there's-
heard is Roger said that it's more cost effective to have the other carrier in that territory build it out.
But I don't even know if they would build it out otherwise.
So of course, you need to throw that responsibility on Waitsfield Telecom to negotiate and consolidate.
Bolton,
That should be part of the CUD.
yeah, really the
And
responsibility is just the
You know,
town.
take the extra public funding that is here to deal with the expensive.
Say
issue.
town of Bolton, if you want to have service to your customers or to
Become
your.
part of the CUD.
But actually, one doesn't let.
But that's the thing, that's after June
Sure.
1st, so they wouldn't even be covered by the plan.
Yes, they would. Yes, they,
That's why the June 1st
No,
deadline
that's
is.
an allocation of funding issue. It's not that they can't become part
Of their
the
plan.
CUD.
You can jump on late.
They can jump on late and then they become a part of the,
they're part of the CUD,
Grant
they're part of the big
application.
financing. Yeah.
If they went it alone, what would be the feeling here if the town came with more than one universal service plan? And let me explain this further, is if you have 2 or 3 wire centers, then you might have a universal service plan that's aligned with each of those service providers, yet it covers the entire territory, as long as they cover.
I could see that.
I mean, I wouldn't have a problem with it, I'm just wondering, because that would make the town, a lot easier for the town to say, I'm working with TDS, or I'm working with whomever, but as long as they cover every address in that.
It's the multiple coverings that's the universal service plan.
Multiple, yeah.
Yes,
Yeah, you're
yes,
solid- you're getting
of the whole
universal.
town, not
Right.
in each.
well,
You're getting, as long as everyone in their town is covered,
Yes.
so in the case of Bolton, they have their.
Yeah.
Not sure who's on the other side of the hill, and they have their Waitsfield Champlain Valley.
Yeah.
And that would prevent them, if they see joining a CUD as a barrier, they could do it themselves. I see joining a CUD as an advantage, so why wouldn't they? But
Yeah, I mean, it's basically the areas where there's already fiber down that have not joined CUDs, or that are close to places that have fiber down that haven't joined CUDs.
Right.
Almost exclusively.
but I guess I just don't like the scenario, like say, in the case of, we'll use Bolton as an example, so we're talking about it. So Waitsfield Champlain really wants to do this. Consolidated is like, no way we're building out those addresses, there's only 4 addresses per square mile. So Consolidated is effectively blocking the entire town from getting
No.
service?
No, so hopefully Maple and Waitsfield Champlain are going to Bolton and saying, we think you should become part of the CUD. And we're just gonna ask for the additional dollars to build out to those extra addresses.
Yeah, so let me just give you some maybe extreme examples, but, and I've been saying this to the CUDs, we'll use Consolidated as an example. If Consolidated can come in and build those other part of the town for, say, $1,000 per address, but it's gonna cost $5,000 for Waitsfield to get to them. Is that something we want to do? Spend that $5,000 per address? And Consolidate it seems to me that if we offer funding to Consolidate, they would do it, right? I guess I'm not sure.
They're gonna do what they're gonna do.
I thought they had $200 million they were spending on their own.
Well, they were spending it on all areas that are already cable. But anyway, how about, I'll make a recommendation. You set this as the guideline, but if you know, you already said you're gonna evaluate these things based on universal service plans. And if you hit 98% of them, that's good. If you only hit 50%, that's bad. Somewhere in between there's an answer.
I think you need to lose the 98% is good and, 50 is bad, 100%.
Okay, well, if that becomes the issue, if you gotta hit 100%,
You have to have a plan to hit 100%.
well, then
Forget Brian said
that becomes a big obstacle for both. right?
I said, don't look perfect. 100%, let's just be clear, 100% is not realistic, right? It's just not. So if it's a directional thing, I get it for motivation and optimism, but if we are going to make decisions on 100%, I think the application process or review process is gonna be pretty simple, because it's gonna be no, 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 maybe a yes in there, but 100% is like, we gotta be flexible. I
So,
want to get as close as we can, but there's going to be these edge scenarios that you're just not going to solve for.
Can we not bring them electricity? Because I will tell you, Tim Briglin was like, every address is electricity and every address is fiber.
And the
How
electric
much that
companies
costs
have,
over how many
I mean,
decades?
but I
What's
guess,
that, $300 billion?
I guess using that
It's not enough.
example
know
though,
it
there's service territories that have monopolies. And in this case, Consolidated has a monopoly on those, like, I don't know how many addresses it is, we're talking Bolton again. And then Waitsfield has it on all the rest of them. So that's
so
really
what's
how
your
it.
point?
It's not an apt analogy.
Trying to,
It's electric.
I guess that,
But do they have monopolies so nobody can come in? Like electric
No,
utilities
no,
absolutely
they
have.
do not have a
traditionally, okay, another company, yes, another company could come in and overbuild either of those.
Yeah, that's what's happening.
Traditionally, among the ILECs, they don't go into another territory. But that doesn't mean that it can't happen.
The reason they don't is
Which is true.
because it's not an economic,
Economically,
it's not an
it's-
economically
no, it doesn't
attractive.
work.
But can I just go back to your what's realistic? I'd like to say that in honor of the intention of the legislation, we ought to look at plans that look at 100%.
Sure.
But let's just be realistic to some degree that as we're looking at construction planning, got to start someplace and move towards better. And better will keep getting better over time, but it's going to be a long time till we get to perfect.
I don't know what that means, but I'm good with
Perfect means-
100%.
So the plan, so
100% what though is what I'm trying to understand.
Of wired addresses. If there's a
And
house
our
that has
bills.
electricity
Our
coming
bills.
to it,
So what
Fiber.
do we tell Waitsfield?
Wireless is one of the solutions to
No.
meet that objective.
no, but go ahead and propose that in a wicked, crazy situation.
I thought I heard you earlier say that if you get into these far-reaching,
That's pretty much what's left. And that doesn't have it in a lot of these places, right?
So going back
I
to
don't know.
this, what is the question of this second bullet point?
So the question is like, well, since we're talking a lot about Bolton. So Waitsfield wants to build that Bolton. What do we tell them they have to do in order to get funding when they don't currently have all the addresses in Bolton?
Tell Bolton to join the CUD.
exactly,
Get a universal service.
There you go.
exactly.
Bolton's talking to him. Tell him to join the CUD.
I certainly see the logic in that.
Well, that's certainly how the
Because that's like-
legislation is structured.
Because the CUD would make sense for them to join at this point, if we're talking just contiguous, would be CV fiber. Who may or may not.
Telling us that CV fiber is rejected Bolton.
No, they haven't applied.
This is part of the private, the private, in the public-private partnerships, we've got private existing providers. There's a lot of public funds here. This is how you can access these particular sets of public funds most effectively. Right? So, I mean, they don't.
Your choices are either not to get our 200+ million or get our 200+ million. The way to get it is to join a CUD.
So is the board, I just want to make sure I'm clear, is the board saying that the only way that you can access funding is to become a part of a CUD? I just want to make sure that we're.
It's the
No,
law
I didn't
says
hear that.
eligible,
The
it
town can-
defines who's
Yeah.
eligible.
The town can present a universal service plan.
Yes, delivered through multiple partnerships.
Yes,
potentially.
100%,
Absolutely.
yeah. Yeah.
That'd be fascinating.
Yeah, but if there's a provider that's coming forward that only represents part of a town, their best strategy is get that town to become part of the CUD and become part of the universal service plan.
Or create a universal service plan with the town and the other providers.
Right, yeah,
Because it says a small communication carrier.
Yes.
You know,
Or that service provider.
for 100% of
protection
addresses,
received.
right, Brian?
with that clarity of requirement, I think I can go back to Waitsville Telecom, we'll talk offline about it, and say, there are ways to get there. And maybe, I use the extreme of 5,000 versus 1,000, but, I can think of, for example, you run point-to-point fiber, or at least someone else tries
I
to
wouldn't
access the point.
I wouldn't engineer it for them.
Yeah.
But isn't Bolton talking to you?
No, Bolton has been working with Waitsfield.
Yes, Bolton is talking to us, but
Yeah,
I haven't told Bolton that they have to do 100% universal service plan, and perfectly willing to do so. And we'll,
That's the string attached to these funds,
okay.
period.
Yeah, I mean, if they're not.
That's what the law says. I mean, we can try to do cartwheels and change the law this next year, but this is what we have in front of us today. That's what the law says.
I had interpreted it differently in this scenario. Like I had it interpreted if it's your service area, if you're building out to all the addresses in your service area, then you're okay and you can access funds. But you couldn't access funds if you were only building out to
Well, that's,
70 or 90 or 98% of those addresses.
the interpretation came because in this legislation, it says a private telecommunication provider can come apply for funds.
Right.
Yes, they can.
Right.
And they
But
still
they have to
can.
have a universal service plan.
And a universal service plan is for.
But you can understand, Rob, and I interpreted this, he said, all right,
So
that means
I
within their
said,
territory.
this is where we go back to in a municipality. It doesn't say for the entire municipality. It's a little bit vague. Okay.
Yeah.
So we are making though a policy.
Yep.
Or a guideline that that a eligible provider that's standalone has to do a universal service plan for the entire town. That's what I just heard. Is that right? Because that's very different.
Yeah, I was gonna ask about that, just to clarify, because in those instances where you have more than one service provider, and that service provider is willing to build anything and everything, but their wire center is only 50% of the community, that may prevent them from applying for anything. It's like, I can't take care of what's on the other side of the hill because that's the other carrier. So
But I'll upgrade all my.
I'll put all my stuff right where you want it. I need a little help. Or are we saying this isn't important? Are we saying the community, or are we defining by wire center for that applicant in the community? I'm sorry.
My interpretation was what you said. And I was thinking of whether it was Waitsfield or whether it was, say, with like Franklin Telephone, where they have a few addresses that are over into neighboring towns.
And then if the other one does not apply, then figure it out. Do whatever you got to, because the case that the incumbent says, I'm not doing it. Great, we're gonna overbuild you.
Then we're gonna overbuild you. That's what's happening in all the
Okay,
CUD towns,
so-
right?
Yeah, but that doesn't solve for the guy who's willing, that ILEC, that's willing to come forward with a grant. And the question is, how does that ILEC frame their universal service plan?
Right.
If that town becomes part of the CUD, the ILEC is gonna provide in that area, and maybe the CUD is going to say, we want you to expand, or we don't, or, if you're working with the municipality and there's a comprehensive plan,
So you're saying,
universal service plan, right? So in the Bolton example, so if Bolton becomes part of the CUD, Waitsfield Champlain is not obligated, well, they might be obligated because they're their operator, to build out, to overbuild into the other territories. They probably would be, yes. That's what the funding is for.
If they join the CD, then it makes it a lot easier.
Yeah,
If they don't,
You gotta do the heavy lifting.
if they don't have any funds.
right, and then if they don't, but the incumbent says, I want to come in and help, but I can only go to my wire center.
Then that's a negotiation that you're having with your CUD. Like, I think you could have multiple people constructing, right? I mean, you have multiple
I
providers.
agree. I'm hoping that the construct encourages
Yeah.
construction.
I actually
Oops, not that.
I'm happy to have it work out however it works, but the construction grant funding is supposed to go to eligible providers. CUDs,
With a universal service plan.
I hear you. We just don't know what that is yet.
Yes, we do.
No, we don't. So
Fine.
if it's a CUD, it's a slam dunk and we can set that category aside. If it's a small communications carrier and they have to come up with a universal service plan and it's in a municipality that is not part of a CUD, they have to show us a universal service plan. And I think we use our discretion to decide whether or not they've done an adequate job with that to merit funding. Because I mean, you know, if you can't get the town to apply for the CUD and you can't get CCI to be your partner, but you have half the town covered in your service area and you want to apply to get the 10% of the people who aren't on your system. I say this as somebody who lives in the regime of Topsham Telephone, okay? If somebody said, well, Corinth doesn't want to join a CUD and, you know, CCI is serving part and they've got part of the universal service plan, but we've got 80% of the town. And so we'd like to come forward anyway and get funding. I think that the legislature wouldn't be happy with us if we said, no, I'm sorry, you didn't join it. The town didn't join a CUD.
I think you're mistaken. I think the legislature
Okay.
wants 100% build out, a different model than what we've had.
You're saying the legislature wants 100% people having to join CUDs, and that's different than when eligible providers
That we
is
want
defined as.
that we want this built universally by municipality.
Would it be helpful if I
Not
pulled
by
up-
district.
If I pulled
So
up a
this is,
map?
hold on one second, if I could. So we have a system right now that is regulated by the private sector market largely.
Yeah.
Okay? This law flips that on its head and says there is a public interest. We must build to the public interest. We must fund it. We must have some public accountability. And so that's really the difference. You know, if we're, you know, tap dancing with the providers or if we're tap dancing with the public bodies.
So
I
is
so
the-
wish
is the
they
intent-
had written it that way then.
The intent is not to work with a consolidated, who's a for-profit model, essentially.
The intent is for the CUD to work with Consolidated and us to work with the CUDs.
But consolidated, not to incentivize, how would I rephrase this?
Consolidated could access, the dream is Consolidated, Waitsfield, Champlain, all of those people in their existing territories, working with their residents
Yes.
to get a universal service plan in each of the towns and get that funded so that it's no longer expensive. And also, so we never again get to this point where we say, oh, it's too expensive, you can't have it, which is the public interest.
Right. Which is why the CUDs came into play in that connection to the municipality.
Why did they make eligible providers include these small carriers then?
So that they technically can apply for grants.
Instead of the CUD?
Yeah.
Instead of having a
Yes,
partnership
because in a
with
town
CUD?
where there's no CUD, you can get funded, but you need to have a
But you're
universal
saying
service
if
plan.
there shouldn't be a town where there's no CUD. is what you-
It's absolutely allowed though in the grant.
But where does the universal service, like, I'm sorry, where does the universal service, I'm not able to connect the dots here.
Okay.
So where does the universal service plan come into existence if you have a small carrier as an eligible provider and there's no CUD? Where does the universal service plan come from?
Universal service plan covers all the addresses in a municipality that was not a member of a CUD on June 1st.
And so,
And an eligible provider can apply for a grant in conjunction with a CUD
but there's no CUD in this town.
or in that area
With,
a universal service plan
created
for
by,
a municipality.
created by them for an entire municipality.
there needs to be a universal service plan for that municipality.
You
Yes.
keep saying that, but I don't get where it comes from. So I'm a small carrier.
Yeah.
I create a universal service plan for the town that I serve half of,
Sure,
okay?
or maybe the town does.
Well,
Yeah.
Okay.
So Roger has a question. I also pulled up, just so for people at home, a visual of what we're talking about with Bolton.
Can you, Roger, do you have comments that could help us in this discussion? And if they're germane exactly to this discussion, we'll have you jump in.
Sure,
This is helpful for us to flesh this out.
sure. We are a small telecommunications carrier, a small communications carrier, and in conjunction with the way the universal service is defined, the town needs to come up with a universal service plan. Now, where I see an issue right now is in C, Bolton.
See what?
C under the eligible carriers.
Yeah.
An internet service provider working in conjunction with the communications union district to expand broadband service to unserved. I think you may need to add a town to that because the way that's written, Consolidated cannot serve the areas of Bolton if Bolton wants to work with them to serve the areas that it's very difficult for us to get to.
Where, I'm sorry, what page are we on?
Page 7.
It's this. So eligible service provider means a CUD, a small communications carrier like Waitsfield, or an internet service provider working in conjunction with a CUD. Now, what about the towns that aren't part of a CUD, is Roger's point.
I think Bolton's got to join a CUD.
Eligible provider means a communications union district, a small or an internet service provider working in conjunction with the CUD. So I think Roger's point is Consolidated can't come in on a straight funding request with a single municipality.
Right. Exactly.
Without Bolton joining a CUD.
Exactly.
That Consolidated can't, but Roger could.
Why? What's the
Because it
difference
says
between
small
consolidated?
communication carrier.
Because they
Small,
made,
large, that's the difference.
they made
That is- that
a
was
special
intentional.
provision for small ILS.
So I just have a question, and maybe the staff could, if we're missing like 10 or 15% of the towns are not in CUG, so we've got 25, 30
Yeah.
towns. Is it worth the effort to do a little bit of outreach and say, hey, where are you at? Did you know? And I mean, when you have a town that is a town office that's open on Tuesdays for 2 hours, they may not know.
And
that little bit of
volunteer
outreach
select boards, and they're dealing with the road issue. They're not talking,
And maybe
about
that number will
this.
go down to 2% or something. I don't know, but perhaps outreach is necessary here to figure out where we really are and how big this problem is. And it might just paper out.
could we, I second that motion and add this caveat. If we did a short list of FAQs and got them out to the regional planning commissions, maybe the regional planning commissions could help the town sort out how they would address universal service plan. You know, like if they're in an area that's served by these small carriers, they could do this. If they're in an area with ISPs, they can do that, or they can join a CUD. I don't know.
I think it's still gonna be a challenge in areas, like say you have a town where it's just the very ends of every road don't have access to cable. We don't fund cable, we only fund fiber. So what do we do in those towns? I'm thinking like some of the Chittenden County towns, like say Williston, for example.
Well, I think, yeah, like we know we're addressing that with Colchester, so.
What do you mean?
Well, I mean, in the case of Colchester, you know, we've been talking, there's a small pocket that it would be ridiculous for a CUD to serve that, they're so small. But we're pushing the telecom providers to provide extensions, and we told them, you know, that we would fund those extensions.
Why would it
What
be
would be-
ridiculous for Colchester to be a part? So if Colchester's a part and most of the town is already served, then it's just that little tiny
Oh, yeah, I
part.
guess you're correct, it's not ridiculous for them to join the CUD.
Yeah.
And what do you mean you're pressing the telecom providers to do
Extend
anything? We're not even in that business. You just said
Oh, no, well,
something.
we're in the business of getting every Vermonter connected, right?
We're in the business of working with CUDs primarily.
All right, well, that's clarification I'm getting here, because that wasn't my impression.
I also don't say, it's like part of the legislation was written for towns that are not in CUDs. It's not just for the 85% of the towns that are in CUDs. So I think we have to be careful with that. And I think we might hear from a lot of eligible providers that are not happy with us saying this is only about CUDs.
Well, we're trying to figure out how to make it work for eligible providers. That's why we just had this very long conversation. And I don't think that we've actually nailed it yet myself, but,
No, I think, but I would,
but I'm a
But I
little
think you're
concerned
close.
that over in Colchester, like, I don't know who you're talking to over there, but there's so much work to be done in these other areas, unless there's an eligible provider who's saying, how can we get funding for this pocket in
There is.
Colchester? Okay.
Yeah, and so then
There is
if it's there, so this is what I would say to you, okay? If there's 2% of the addresses in Colchester that are underserved right now, and there's one provider, and that provider is coming forward and saying, we can do those 2%. How do we do that? So I would say, okay, is Colchester, were they part of a CUD by June 1st? No, they were not. Okay, great. So then, do we have a universal service plan to get above 25 for anything that's not 25.3? Yes, we do. Okay. Oh, look, it's those 2% of those addresses. Check.
Who are they applying with, the town? Is it the
Yes,
town
yes.
and the
Colchester and the provider are coming in and saying, we have a universal service plan to get the rest of the unserved and underserved addresses filled.
So that makes perfect sense. We had one clarity. So if to get the 2%, if it's extending cable and not doing fiber, do we do it?
It's 100. Boy,
No, it's
The tech-
25.3.
no, but the technology,
No,
no,
the
but
technology
the
has to be
build
capacity.
has to be.
The capacity.
it could work.
Try to back up to this example with Ultra. So unless Waitsfield can get consolidated to come on board to build out those addresses, they can't apply. I'm just trying to like zero in on a
Well, that's not the
specific
only
example
answer.
to help us understand this. I don't know if Roger has something more to add
Yeah,
to
yeah.
it.
What are we looking at, by the way?
We're looking at a map of, this is the wire center. So this is showing
Wait,
who
are
is
you
served.
gonna offer Roger the opportunity to comment? I thought he's had his hand up for a really long time too.
Oh, Roger's hand just went down, so it might have been up for a while. I'm not sure. But what we're looking at on the board here is, so you see the town boundaries, and then in the colors, you see the boundaries of the different telecom providers. The red there is consolidated, the
You go
green
to the
is.
board
Waitsfield.
actually and show me. I haven't. This is.
Go to what, I'm sorry?
I can be your chair.
Somebody tell
So
me,
the town boundary.
You're
Red.
talking-
Red.
where's
is
the
CCI,
town of
is it?
Bolton? Where's
This
the
is
town line?
There's a tiny little corner.
Yeah.
Okay,
That's-
thank you.
This little corner.
It
So
has what?
So those addresses are in Bolton and they're consolidated. The rest of addresses in Bolton are Waitsfield Champlain.
And what are the black dots?
The black dots are addresses. That's what I just.
So there's nothing in the red area. in
Underserved
Bolton.
addresses. They're locations, actually.
They're locations.
And what are the blue dots?
The blue dots are also locations. The blue dots are served 25.3.
Green dots are 100.
I would
So
zoom
where's
in
our
more.
problem statement?
So
What's
our
our problem
problem is,
area?
right, let me see if I can zoom, oh boy.
The red.
Hold on, this will take a second to go.
yellow.
You gotta turn on the layer.
They will, it just takes, there's a lot of
nobody
layers.
here?
So these addresses in here are the problem.
It's,
Yeah.
Right.
So the people were here.
the unfortunate color on color there.
So
I did
So-
not see that back there.
I kind of don't get why we would reject a grant application from Waitsfield Telecom if they came with the town and said, we're gonna do, the universal service plan here is all these addresses are on our plan for construction, with the exception of a list of addresses that are under CCI. And the problem is the town can't make CCI address those locations. And so I'm a little bit flummoxed why we would say no unless you can show that CCI is in agreement with the universal service plan that says they're gonna step up. I just, like,
That's the problem we've been solving for, Holly. With 79 and 71.
believe
right?
me.
I know, me
lived
too,
it.
me too,
Okay.
3-1, baby.
Yeah.
Still.
I hear you, but I do think that you can't So your only solution is to say, thou shalt build over
Yes,
CCI.
yes,
Except
CCI
there's-
build or get
except-
built over.
Except those addresses aren't physically connected pole to pole. There's a ridge in between there. That's the complication, right?
Right here, that might be the complication,
Yeah.
yeah. That's why the wire
Yeah.
center is
So the
divided.
wire
Well,
centers.
so your universal service plan might say these are not possible under our plan.
But then we're not achieving the 100%.
Or here's the cost of them is X.
Or we can't get this in the next 3 years, but we might be able to, look for now, Mike. We plan to get it in the next 20 years.
Or this will
Waitsville
cost you.
Telecom can work with Consolidated.
Well,
No, Bolton has to work with Consolidated. Why wouldn't Bolton's needs to have a plan with Waitsfield for the Waitsfield spots and a plan with CCI for the CCI spots. And they need to do that because that's the work the CUDs are doing, right? They have to act as their own.
The way the statute says is the small carrier can apply. It's
They
not
can
the town of
apply.
Bolton.
But the universal service plan is on, it's for the municipality or the CUD.
Agreed. But the
So
person
I think-
applying is Waitsfield Telecom.
Right.
So,
Or
so
the entity applying, not the town, unless they join the CUD. They
They
should
can't
just,
apply for any projects. They can only apply for projects for universal service plan projects.
with the small communication provider.
okay, there's so many ways to kill this. And this is one of the ways that CCI will kill this in the end. Is they just sit there and the town can't make a deal with them and Waitsfield can't make a
Yes.
deal with them. So all these people get a no vote from us.
That's the
While
town's
we
choice,
sit
though.
there-
But that's the town's choice by not joining the CUD.
Right, they can just
But
join the CUD.
joining the CUD doesn't fix it either.
Sure it does.
Why?
The CUD does not get funding unless they have a plan.
So
for
what's
a
their
universal
plan for
service
that?
plan.
They could work with CCI.
They're-
Exactly.
Whatever, I mean,
So-
that, I have that little area in probably half of the towns in
Yeah.
my 2 districts down there.
Yeah.
I mean, the universal service plan is, yeah, it's hard. How are you gonna do it?
Well,
There's
what
a
if
lot of
CCI
money.
Says no. I mean, CCI
Then
can
you-
avoid the whole thing with
Yeah.
that.
So this is happening in every CUD,
Yeah.
you guys.
So you're saying that the funding has to extend to overbuild any non-cooperating.
Hopefully
area.
CCI is jumping in and building.
I think if you were the incumbent, you would, and a CUD came, knocked on your door, your CCI, for example, and said, hey, I gotta solve this problem here, it's right here in my community or it's in my district, I gotta do it as part of my universal service plan. And I'm gonna help you get funding for it. They ought to be jumping on that. It's
Right?
kind of a no-brainer.
Yeah.
Their incumbent is, they're just gonna overlash and they're gonna run, whereas WCVT coming up and over the hill or having to create a new wire center on top of them, make ready, moving pole, it's
Yeah.
hugely expensive.
Right.
So for the CUD to negotiate that, I mean, it's a great thing, or the town could do it.
Yeah.
If they wanted to take on that.
They don't
risk.
want to be part
They
of
have
working with
choices.
with their neighbors. Yeah.
So I think Roger has his hand up again.
Yeah, Roger.
So I think the town of Bolton could work with CCI in the few homes down along the border. Because the town, there are several locations right at the border that are actually served from Waterbury and so it makes more sense for CCI to build it. But at the same time, there isn't the avenue for the town to work with CCI because C does not include them as an eligible entity in this. It only includes communication union districts and not towns.
So what Roger is saying is that the CCI and, yes, they could, Roger, because the municipality could work to put together a universal service plan. And they're eligible. The municipality could get the funding.
There's no
eligible.
provision in this.
Okay, no, they're not. Okay.
Yes, an internet service
Yeah.
provider
So
working in
since-
conjunction with the CUD.
Yeah, so, okay, so the municipality, so the only option there is CUD.
Or an ISP in conjunction with the CUD.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is that something for the parking lot or
Or,
legislative action to open that door up?
Well, do you want legislative action? That's the question. And it sounds like.
That's why I put it in
I just have Bolton join the CUD.
Yeah, I mean, why create, yeah, I mean, that's,
That's why I'm asking.
Yeah.
Is this something for the parking lot for consideration?
Yeah, and I don't know if Judy can help with that, or staff can help with that.
yeah, I mean, if this is a problem, right, exactly. If,
Right?
you know, like all the CUDs are
Yes.
finding
I mean,
problems.
Bolton just, I mean, it's
His
the one
legis-
example we found, but solving for them is not easy unless, as long as they're not part of the CUD.
Right.
None of it's easy, it's all relevant, but when they're part of the CUD, it is easier to solve for than when they're not.
Yeah.
So,
who delivers
So,
that message?
so I'll be happy to deliver the message. You know, the point is, you're being clear, we're being clear, and the message is, okay, the way you can do this is join the CUD, and I'll test that message.
yeah, the only way we can see solving for it is
Yeah.
for them joining.
I mean,
If we don't solve for it, we think it'll be very difficult.
Waitsfield Champlain could apply on behalf of both of them, and Waitsfield and CCI could have an agreement, I guess, together. Sure, I mean, you could do that too.
I mean, there is a
Yeah,
cost. I don't think you're that, I think there is a possibility, because I can guess that Consolidated is building fiber wherever there's cable. There's cable in Waterbridge. They're already building fiber in Waterbridge. Question is, how far they have to extend their fiber?
And it's also a timing factor too. So say if Waitsfield is ready to build next year and all these addresses and Consolidated, it's like, oh yeah, this is on our plan for 4 years from now.
Well, it's in the
Plan.
plan. We've already heard from the board that that's acceptable. As long as there's a universal service plan.
So you would go to, which is CB, would serve Bolton. CB would have Waitsfield, they'd have whatever they can get with CCI, and it's really just about Bolton and the CUD coming to terms. And I'm kind of curious, and Roger's hand is up, whether Bolton has expressed reasons why it won't go to a CUD format.
Well, I haven't asked them to.
And that goes to your point about maybe some friendly outreach to the
Yeah,
towns
I've
that
not
haven't
asked-
joined.
Yeah, I've
Because
not.
Waterbury did join over the summer after June 1st.
And it's highly likely it's a resource constraint. It's like they're too busy running their town and just not paying attention to this. And
Yeah.
But it also goes the other way too, of a CUD wanting to make sure they don't expand beyond their capacity. That's the other side of the coin. Like maybe
Well,
maybe we're like, okay, well, we're trying to figure out universal service for this set area, adding additional towns at this time when it doesn't come with additional pre-construction money because of the June 1st cutoff isn't something we want to do.
Well, I think you've kind of beat the horse enough here. I mean, it's.
Well, I want to make a
Yeah.
statement of what we've concluded, but Dennis.
I can,
I'm not sure if I heard that we have CUDs saying, thank you, but we don't want you in our club.
Well, I'm saying this is going back to with the pre-construction thing where they said by setting a deadline of June 1st, there was no incentive for them to take on other towns because they're not getting any other funding to pay for the engineering in those towns.
Because they weren't part of the pre-construction grants.
Right, because they weren't part of the CUD in time.
That's
So I'm
a
saying it might go
legislative
both
issue.
directions, where it might not
Well, that
be
was the
towns that
decision
don't want
we
to join CUDs, but what if the CUD says, no, we don't want you to join it? Then they're,
We made
the
that.
town's
Okay, I'm
out.
just gonna do a timeout. It is a time check here. It's
Yeah.
2:00
Yeah.
and
We are bogged down.
we are super in the weeds.
Yeah, so
So
make
we
your
just-
recommendation.
Computer
Give us a-
It sounds to me like we decided that the universal service plans must address all locations in a town. The town that is not part of a CUD must develop a universal service plan or join a CUD.
That's clear message. I'll take that to board.
Before they can access construction funding.
Yes.
so may I ask a couple of questions?
Hop in, Roger, please.
Sure. If you say if the town comes up with a communications plan and they work with Waitsfield and request funding, if it's okay that if Waitsfield works with CCI to cover the other locations that we can't get to, if that's okay, I think we can move forward that way. There are several reasons why Bolton didn't join a CUD, and one was the fact that we're ready to build now. And if they joined the CUD, they could be in phase 3, which may mean 2025, 2026. I'm not certain. So that is the reason why they looked to us. And thirdly, they viewed us as they want us to build. There's no guarantee that the CUD would use our plant and not overbuild us. So they're
Roger, is it fair to say that they don't need the funding? If they're already planning to do this, they don't need our funding. Is that
No.
fair?
He's already planning to do it.
He's already planning to do it.
we do need funding.
They being you.
We're requesting funding, and that's what will help us build out sooner than later. And so that's why we've been waiting, so we can actually apply for the construction grants.
Sense.
So you do need funding to make this section of Bolton work. And
Yes.
if you don't get it, it's not gonna be developed.
Just like the
We have a budget each and every year, and we take it to the places that are the most unserved and underserved. What the funding helps us do is speed up the ability of us to build to more locations in a faster time frame. And so that's really what it helps out. So there may be areas where we'll take the jump and say, okay, we need to build here now because it's underserved and the residents need that built now. But like I said, any funding really helps us extend our reach quicker and serve the customers in our areas quicker.
So there is an issue with how Roger framed it. He said, okay, we'll create a universal service plan with Bolton and we'll get CCI to agree. We're going to have a grant agreement, however, with Waitsville. So how do we enforce a universal service plan that's conditioned upon a CCI build? Because they're not the grant applicant.
Are we doing on that attorney?
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Well, I don't see why you can't, I don't see why the CUD would slow this down. That doesn't make any sense.
That wasn't a C, but that, no, but that's, you're responding to what Roger said.
Yeah. I'm responding to what Roger said. I'd say, and join a CUD with a prepackaged plan. It just seems like that would be ridiculous.
I think Roger said that Bolton didn't want to get slowed down by the CUD.
Yeah.
And they didn't want to have to be considered in a greater
right.
scheme of things.
Right,
I also heard him say that they're intending to apply for money because it'll help them do it faster. So either way, CUD or Waitsfield Champlain, we need money to make that happen faster.
Right.
Yeah, the UCBT has a construction plan. It's like a shovel-ready project.
right,
They just need
right.
money. That's what I heard him say.
And what they really need now is CCI to agree to cover that segment that they need to reflect in the universal service plan. And I'm just alerting you to, okay, accept the plan, but you don't have any enforcement capacity.
Which is why I went to the CUD, say, look, they got a prepackaged plan and they join the CUD. That should not slow this down because it's already designed and ready to go. And then the CUD has the enforcement power.
Oh, I'm
Yeah.
Because they have a deal with CCI?
No, this CUD has to make this part of their agreement with the Waitsfield Telecom and CCI.
But the only way what you're saying works is if you think the CUD will have an agreement with CCI.
Yeah. But ultimately, if Waitsfield can get it, then they can get it.
Right. If this was a CUD town, it would be on Waitsfield to do it, and there'd be more.
Right. Yeah.
Probably.
So I don't see joining the CUD as anything that should slow this down, is what I'm saying. And then you get your enforcement power. Because the CUD builds it in the operating agreement.
If the CUD has an agreement with Consolidated to build out those addresses,
But if,
Waterbury went to
Bolton
CD5.
goes with the CD.
But if we-
Just
if-
accept that
if-
Because the wire centers are.
Roger already thinks he can get that,
The issue is wire center and what control we have over who has that wire center.
Right, all I'm saying is, if CV, Waterbury says, yeah, we want those community houses, those dozen or so, 2 dozens that are out there, I know they're in the other town, and they incorporate it. And it's covered.
CV and Maple split the town.
Yeah,
Yes.
so that,
Can
because
they
there's a
do that?
mountain, there's a
Can they
ridge
do
there, and this
that?
must exist all over Vermont, where the wire centers are these messy.
oh yeah, we've done that with,
And as long
we're
as
doing that
they-
with Wolcott.
If,
Why don't we split the CUDs like we're doing with Wolcott?
Well, yeah, that's why you're
Yeah.
splitting them by wire center and you're
Yeah.
just saying, okay, Bolton, we're not leaving you
That's why
high
we
and
did
dry.
that.
We've got 24 houses here, but they're gonna be over on this side and we're gonna give them consideration for that.
I just want to be sure that I'm tracking with you. We who are going to give who consideration for
Well,
what?
when they ask for
When
construction,
they who?
the CUD or the provider who's going to solve the problem for broadband connectivity. They ask for grant money, that we see those addresses to the point that Brian made, we can put that into consideration of what they get. Whereas if they're neglecting those spaces and it's clearly within their wire center.
Yeah, that's a problem we don't have here. Now we've got a problem that, and so I'm keep going, because
So-
when it's not in their
so-
wire center,
When it's in the wire center for CV, then they should be adding that in there, or we should be sending them signals to add it in there, because that wire center slightly overlaps into this town.
so I'm going to say it back to you another way, because you're using the technically correct approach, but we would create grant conditions for CV fiber, for example, in which they include that portion of Bolton that's part of the CCI wire center. Because otherwise it's kind of left out and unenforceable, even though it goes across into what's technically not their town, not their member town. And the only problem I think we have to look at with that is whether under Act 79, whether the CUD has the authority to go into a non-member town for anything.
And CUDs already do have the ability to build in towns.
Well,
that
I think it could
are
be a
adjacent to the
condition of the
territory.
contract, it's like,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. Deals between CUDs. I can't do that because it's in a different wire center and they
Yeah.
talk to their other CUD partner or town.
But if there's a town without a CUD is the problem.
Or town.
Madam Chair, yes. What is the problem that we are trying to solve right now?
I think we're trying to address in staff's
And we're stuck on the
recommendation.
third.
We're on the second bullet.
Yeah. Okay. So I can make a recommendation if it's helpful, and Brian can clarify it, which would be helpful. So the first part is that universal service plans must address all locations in the town. It just must address them, all locations with a capital L. And then a town not part of a CUD must have a universal service plan or join a CUD. Now, where it cannot serve where it cannot enforceably serve a portion of their town, they can either suggest a plan. We can, in our discretion, decide what we're going to do about it in terms of making it somebody else's problem or a condition on somebody else's grant, or we can apportion funding according to what is addressed by their plan. In other words, if they only have a 75% solution, we might give that town build. I know, come with me though, come with me. We might give that town only 75% of a construction grant and take the remaining 25% of the underserved and try to address it through another grant, because we have to find a way. We have to be the keepers of 100%. And ultimately, where the rubber meets the road is this board has to have the ultimate universal service plan to make sure that we don't leave people out or that we've attempted to make a plan.
I just want to go back to the legislation and what it says. We're allowed to give to communication unit districts, small communication carrier, or an internet service provider working in conjunction with a communication unit district. Let's focus on that. And these one-offs that come in, if they want to apply, let them apply. But our mandate, until we get legislative changes, to follow these marching orders.
But what we're trying
And
to
at
address
this
is.
point, like, we could spend all day continuing to noodle on this and never come to resolution. To me, in my very black and white,
Yeah.
communication unit district, small communication carrier, or consolidated, I'm just using big here, with a CUD.
Yeah.
But
And we
that's
follow what it
it.
says.
You're being black and white, but you didn't go to the next clause, which says to get a construction grant, you have to have a universal service plan.
Right, I'm talking about eligible, like Bolton has made a conscious choice not to join a CUD. That's a conscious choice that they've made.
Yeah, so they
And
get a
part of that means
partner.
they're just not gonna get help from
So
us
they-
unless they can fit.
Because, and they've made that choice because their provider, I'm sure, but it sounds like told them that they would get them there before the CUD.
Exactly.
Yeah.
To me, that he said, they don't need the money. Go forth and go on. I know that's not what he just said.
Yeah.
But if we're gonna slow him down, that says to me, you don't need the money. That's why the town of Bolton didn't sign up. They're already fast tracked.
I do think, I really want to support, I think we could noodle on this for a long time, but I want to support until we have something different. Just, I mean, there's nothing that needs to move right now.
Because we don't have an application in front of us. What we were trying to do actually is not solve for who's eligible for a grant, but how we were going to check the box on whether or not they had a universal service plan. And we haven't addressed that. So going forward, we can look at the applications and address them on a application by application basis.
The universal service plan is defined.
Yes, it is, and not the way you say. But I'm just saying, we can deal with it, rather than make a policy
Yeah.
about it, we can deal with it.
The applicants are gonna come in with different versions of the
Exactly.
universal service plan that we can't anticipate.
Exactly.
And if we make it a requirement that it meets some strict guidelines, we'll never get
It's
an
a plan.
application.
For providing.
So let's just see what they,
That just doesn't say,
for guidelines,
Exactly.
see what they come in with.
State, I'm coming in, I'm gonna provide universal service. Step one is this, I'm gonna get these addresses. 20 years out, I'm gonna get the rest. That's their plan. However they wanna, it's a plan, as you've said.
okay.
It doesn't mean everybody gets built day one.
So when staff comes forward with a grant
Very
like
true.
this, you're
Unless we
gonna
have
be
$1 billion.
talking to us about what the leaks in the universal service plan are, and whether or not there's a plan for addressing the leakage, right?
And the applicant should propose what that plan is
Yeah,
to serve the rest of the
and
addresses.
know that some people feel very strongly that it's gotta be 100%.
Right, and I'm gonna go to, it has to be a plan. It doesn't mean I have to build in the first day to that, but maybe it's 20 years, maybe it's 30 years. That's my plan. I'm gonna get there.
Yeah.
No, I know, I mean,
Being
no,
extreme.
but no,
like-
that's what the law says, that
Yeah.
there has to be a plan for 100% of the addresses.
Right.
I wouldn't want to encourage
And
people for a
it's-
20-year
But that is the plan.
Yeah,
You can
right.
have a plan. I'm
Yes,
not saying that's the thing to do.
Yes.
Exactly.
Okay, so,
Okay, so we're gonna find these all around the state. Another one is on the screen.
Exactly.
okay,
So much
so.
for thinking of things that can be dealt with in 15 minutes.
Yeah. What do you
Let
say?
me switch
Yeah,
back
we haven't even
to-
gotten to the one that I had a problem with.
So,
We may have entered that one with this. We'll see. Let me go back to the presentation.
yeah, so now the next bullet is leveraging existing private resources and asset high priority given to partnerships with the Communication Union District.
Working on getting there.
We, I think that that's more than it's more than a high priority. And
So my problem with this proposal is that, I just wish it said where available. I mean, there aren't make-ready reductions available to everyone everywhere, right?
that's right.
All right, what was it says? Say that again.
Which
So,
number?
and we're, on.
Yeah, one.
No, we
one.
said,
Yeah.
make to account for. That means they're not available, they're not.
Okay.
Okay, so that language you think acknowledges that it's not available in every CUD.
Says all additional funds or discounts should be accounted for. So we're kind of on the theme that if they're there, we want to see them.
Yeah, and they should be in the application.
Right.
Other sources
Right.
of cost reductions have you?
Yeah, that really kind of encompasses RDOF too, so, yeah.
It also encompasses towns asking for, or CUDs or providers asking individual towns for access to their America Rescue Plan, their ARPA funds. as well.
Yeah, this extended from the RDOF discussion, because it's not just RDOF, there are other grants.
I think we're good.
Yeah,
I
good,
think we're
okay, good,
So we're
good,
on-
thank you.
Good on one. Number two, and once again, these are all like priorities. They're not ranked in any order. They're not requirements. This is about evaluating it. If we get one that gets all these, that's wonderful. Demonstrate project readiness, and this is where we just put a time frame on things. And we just propose that it must be built within 18 months or presented as a phased approach over the next 24 months of what they're applying. Like, I don't know, and this comes down to a question of like, do we want a CUD applying for, okay, we have 4 phases in our build out, we're applying for funding for all 4 phases right now and showing you what it is. I don't think that's what we want.
For 5 years, for 4 build years, right? Right.
Right, we want it to be a little bit, we want it to be phased and acknowledge that things could change a little bit. So
As long as it's backed by universal service plan for 100%.
yeah, as long as there's a
That's correct.
plan for that time, but they're
Or
only
if fist
seeking the
bumping was
funding. Yes, they're only seeking the funding, yes. The other,
Like, it would be helpful to see if they're gonna phase, if they could, at a high level, show the phasing and then
Yes.
which phase they're applying for.
yes.
Right.
Yep.
Right.
That's understood. The other clause in this is where there might be some discussion, is do we want an operator selected before they apply?
Yeah.
For
construction?
For construction, yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
Right?
And also
we?
make ready
Well, at least
I
applications.
think so.
Yeah, we-
think
You may
ready
not
app-
sign an agreement, but if you're in discussion for that.
Well, let's be one side of the fence or the other.
Yeah.
Dan.
That's what I want to bring this up because you may have choices.
But if you're building and you don't have an agreement with an operator, and you only have 18 months to get there,
18 months.
Well, it's not the entire plan.
It's for a phase.
the other thing that's true is if you have a deadline of 18 months in your grant and you're in negotiations with an operator, you just gave a real lever to that operator because they know you have a deadline.
If you have contract with them to finish up some details.
Well, I'm just saying, if you don't have an agreement, right? I mean,
I don't, it feels prescriptive. Like, I would judge an application that doesn't have an operating agreement, like, I'd be like, this
it
feels,
should be an indicator rather than a requirement.
yeah.
Well, this is
Well, we
all
didn't make it
about
a requirement.
evaluating.
It's a
So
should,
this is
not a
more
shall.
interpretation of like how people who are applying, how we're interpreting
Build it.
you meeting project
It will come.
readiness.
So I intentionally used should and shall in this. This is a should, not a shall.
You have the
This shall,
Wait, there's like 6 conversations going on here. Everybody's throwing out a different clause. So where are we?
well, my point was, we're saying operator of the network should also be selected. That's a should. But this shall demonstrate project readiness.
They have a really good reason why they
Yeah.
haven't selected an operator, like, tell us.
Okay.
Yeah.
But any application that doesn't have an operator lined up imminently is gonna be looked at more skeptically, I would think.
Yeah.
Based on the
Yeah.
timeframes.
And I think that's what this says.
So the way I hear that is you shouldn't be funding them until that operating agreement comes
It
in.
just depends on how it's positioned, like, I can't forecast all the different scenarios by which someone may have a partnership lined up. So that may be very likely, Holly, absolutely, but there, maybe someone tells us an amazing story that we say we're gonna fund it without that, I don't know, I'm not gonna prejudge it.
I mean, I guess I could go there, but it's hard to imagine.
Oh, it sounds like a long
It's
shot.
really hard to imagine saying, yeah, sure, build it, and then, let's see if
And we'll
anybody
figure it
wants to
out.
operate it. Yeah. Yeah,
I'd have serious concerns.
but so that's more on us than anything else.
So
We're
I
yanking people's chain.
just want to make an observation. Every time you say, like the Supreme Court said about, free speech, we'll know it when we see it, kind of thing. We'll know it when we see it. You give a lack of clarity to the CUD. And so every time we give clarity to the CUD, we help them organize their world.
So why don't we just say we have a preference that an operating agreement exists at the time of application, however, it is not a requirement.
I think that's what this says. Because notice, again, I was very careful with the wording.
Yeah, we're trying to with the wording just to say, like, if you want to get all the, whether it's gonna be points or however the heck we're gonna score this, if you want to get everything, we want you to have an operator. We want you to show us that you have all your make-ready applications in. We want you to say that this is gonna be done in the next 18 to 24 months. These are all like about how we're evaluating the applications in this section.
It would get you the highest score.
Yes. Okay.
Okay,
And just for clarity, this shall demonstrate project readiness is a very vague statement. This meaning
Meeting
these
criteria.
three things?
yes,
Yes.
I'll change that. Thank you.
Maybe the third one here is an easy one.
You're an optimist.
I am an optimist. I'm an optimist.
I would.
Oh, God.
So this is
Oh,
what I
God.
would say about this, that the CUD should just tell us how they plan to do that. That's all.
That as well.
You know, can I make a note here that there is just a boatload of Federal Communication Commission regulations on consumer protection. And so if you're going to comply with FCC regulations, which you don't necessarily have to do as an ISP, depends, that would be one way to get here. And net neutrality standards are a whole boatload of definitional issues, right? But a little guidance from this group might help people get there. You know, whether it's, you know, extra capacity, time, having standard tie-offs to other networks, making a pledge against, you know, prioritizing traffic.
So once again, this is evaluating applications, and I really just want them to tell us how they're going to meet it. And I'm going to look more kindly upon an application where the provider, where the operator is committed to net neutrality.
It's, yeah, I mean, it's
So I'm
it's
just,
not optional, but I mean, they just have to
so
tell
I'm
us.
just asking the rest of the board members, like, this is highlighted yellow. It doesn't mean we're not gonna vote on it. It doesn't mean it's not a consideration. What does it really mean to you?
Means we don't need a working group for this. The green ones.
That's the goal, even though.
Okay,
we're good so
okay,
far.
now I
But
get it, because I'm a little
we're
concerned that,
close enough to come back with you with language that we can vote on.
yeah, it's not that you're gonna show up and go, oh, no, you can't have an opinion on that. That's a yellow.
No.
No, yellow's recommendations, green is need help.
Okay,
Right.
okay,
Yes, exactly.
okay.
Yes. So the green, this one we need a working group.
I thought we did this. I thought
Well, we didn't
thought we did
define the
this.
specs.
We did,
I
and
thought
if
we
you go
said it was
back to the,
flexible.
yeah, and if you go back to the tape of the meeting,
That you did.
you had consensus on the board that affordability is really a matter of making the network sustainable.
Yeah.
And using grant money to the best of their ability to keep the costs down.
If we have that, we can just take that and go with it, or we can start a working group. You all tell us.
I felt this was settled. Did you know?
I don't,
Do you
I don't
remember I
feel-
talked to it?
right, I don't feel like we need to continue to opine on this. You did a great presentation. Others?
Agreed.
Okay.
Okay, good.
Oh, working group
Holly
created and
with the working
disbanded. Yeah.
Yeah, if you need a restatement of where we ended up,
No,
I'd be happy to provide that.
Okay.
We'll pull the statement.
So the next one is a big one that touches on a lot of issues that,
Patty.
oops, sorry.
Yes.
So just, I know we just moved past it, but I wonder if the question was, how do we evaluate that? I think that maybe that was the question. So, okay, so they could just,
Well, I mean,
I don't know.
it's really about financial acumen than it is about, it isn't about what I heard. Okay, so now we're
so
going
how do you,
back.
but how do you meet it? So
Yeah.
do you just say, yes, we've done that, we've made a statement about why this is affordable or something? I think that's what they're asking. Is that what you're asking?
Well, I think that, not really, because I think
Okay.
that's,
All right.
yeah.
What we,
I'm
what
sorry.
agreed that it wasn't, is it is not a subsidy program.
Yeah,
What we agreed it is not is a discount
yes, it's not.
or
discount.
a prefix
Right.
So you've
service
pretty
plan.
narrowly defined what it is, which is they need to build a network at a cost that allows an entry fee as low as possible.
Yes, but we did not set a
Right, we did
benchmark.
not
In
set a
fact, we
benchmark.
agreed
Exactly.
that we
That's
were
right,
not
that's
setting
right.
a
Yep,
benchmark.
yep, exactly.
Exactly.
I think that's clear.
I think you have guidance and
Yep.
interpret it and
Yep.
see where it goes. Help us with this geography,
Okay.
diversity.
So the legislation says that all of the construction funds and pre-construction funds and all that, there should be a geographic diversity of funds, of the allocation of funds. For the pre-construction grants, it was easy because it was just within the CUDs and we figured out something that wasn't based on mileage. It was just based on unserved and underserved addresses. Now we're dealing with the entire state. We're dealing with other complications too. We're dealing with RDOF. We're dealing with CUDs versus non-CUD regions. We're questioning of whether to allocate money on a town-by-town basis versus allocating it as CUDs and non-CUDs. Like, how are we dividing this all up is a big question, and I expect to have various proposals coming in from outside. I know several CUDs are working on it. I wouldn't be surprised if some of the private ISPs are working on it to their advantage. But it's up to us to decide how we want to divide the funds. Are we just looking at an application and if it's good, we're approving it, but how do we meet that, promote the geographic diversity of fund allocations?
So your real question is it first come, first serve? Or are we, we've already made funding allocations by CUD.
We made them based on unserved or underserved addresses without a plan. So I think it may be a little more complex for doing it for construction since the costs are going to vary and it's not only going to be based on unserved and underserved addresses. So as I said, this is
that
something where I
not
feel like it's a
something that
working group.
You and Christine can come up with, and do you need concrete guidance from us? Unless board members want to have a,
I thought we've already done this. We've set these benchmarks for allocation of funding and, that sort of says that it isn't like, just to take an example, it's not like CV Fiber can be the first one in and take all the money. It's allocated.
the formula already allocated that out.
Well, we made one formula for pre-construction. We certainly can take the same formula and apply it.
Well, you and I
But
talked about different
We
formulas,
have,
so
we
should-
have different
yes,
views
we
of
can
what that
come back
formula
with
should be.
But you, yeah,
And whether we should
Well,
count
maybe you
RDOF
guys want to
addresses.
tell us what your differences are.
Well, one of the things we've talked about is taking a look at road miles and span miles versus unserved addresses. Because if you look at the Northeast Kingdom, we haven't looked at this yet. This is what we've talked about. We really should evaluate. For example, it might take 20 miles to serve 10 unserved addresses in the Northeast Kingdom. It might only take 2 miles somewhere in southern Vermont because of densities. So your real costs are driven by mileage as opposed to number of unserved. But we haven't looked at that. That data may correlate, but we haven't looked at that data yet. That's why I jumped on the fact that maybe we can come back with a recommendation because our next step is to look at span and road miles and correlate that to unserved address, see if there's a correlation.
Our next step is to get a GIS person. to be
Yeah,
able to do
this is
Will
it.
those
Yeah.
differences show up in the actual costs they're applying for in their phase? Because it should be reflected in the actual construction estimates that they're going to be providing us, right?
Yeah, but we have to provide, we're gonna have criteria to decide, right? And so if our criteria, today our criteria is unserved addresses, we're skeptical that there should be other criteria.
So I guess I'm going back then. So pre-construction funding, doing it on a pre-allocated basis, I understood and it made sense, and I think the methodology came up with worked great, or will work great. Construction grants, I had expected they're going to be applying for specific construction costs based on estimates and contingencies.
Yes.
Yeah, of course.
But how do we
We're not doing a
decide?
pre-allocated thing that says this CUD gets this much reserve, this one.
Oh, but that gets,
No, but
that's
you're trying to worry about
the
all
heart of
the-
the issue here. That's the heart of the issue.
No, I know, but but if every dollar of funding is going to connect the next location in a cost-effective and most expedited way, isn't that the best use of that dollar? So like, I'm okay if one CUD gets 80% of their funding before another CUD, if that's just how the timing works on how they apply and receive those grant dollars.
And when the statute suggests that it has to be geographically distributed, you're okay with that being the methodology?
Over what time? Over what time? Over 50 years, sure. I think we can achieve that. But I don't want geography and some like allocation method holding up a high functioning construction ready CUD because another one isn't ready to take their pro rata share.
That makes a lot of sense.
I agree.
I agree with that totally.
I mean, otherwise you go to the pace of the mean.
So may I just make a suggestion that we think about the second construction application on geography?
Like
That's
if you haven't
that's where
gotten
we
one
were.
in-
Well, no, if you're coming back for your second one, then we're looking at geography and
I like that.
Sure. And you're in the third
Promote
and fourth
geographic
and fifth.
diversity.
Yeah.
Of fund.
In the
I don't even
CUDs,
know
we have
if you have
CUDs in all
diversity.
sections of the state, correct?
You know, I did
No,
all
that's
that.
the other thing. This is also this is also considering areas where there are no CUDs.
which is VTEL's territory in Burlington, basically.
Forest and field.
There's fiber or
But
cable.
they don't need it. Mostly.
I do like that proposal.
So wait till the second,
Yeah.
wait till the second application before. we-
Because the first one, you have to, it's an 18-month bill. Like you can't come in and say, I want 3 years worth of funding or 4 years worth of funding.
Yeah, no one party can suck it all up by making it
Exactly.
the whole 5 years. We'll take it all.
Yeah.
Does it help them with planning to know, to have an idea of what they have available though? That's the question. So if they have an idea that based on their density, they have access to this percentage they should have access to this percentage of the funds, does it
This is
help
why
them?
it doesn't help, Rob, I don't think. It's because we know it's not enough money for everybody to
for
have
anybody.
everything.
Yeah. Everybody's gonna have to bond, probably. Everybody should be planning that they're gonna have to bond.
Now, with what Brian just said, and going back, I don't want to go back, but, you know, the 18-month build cycle is too small.
Okay.
So especially when you talk about 26-week lead times, which we have to do something about, but for them to put forward a plan that's only for that piece and we're going to fund it, it feels like you keep getting to these dead end roads and you hope they're going to continue to build, and that a signal should be sent to them to send a plan of everything they know. But they're asking for this much, so we have insight as to what the rest of their plan is and their construction
Right.
cycles and so on. We're not holding that as their estimates. And we're looking at these 18-month chunks so that we have insight as to what's coming next. And I would like to inspire some better project management here because of.
Yeah, I actually included that, by the way. I did pick up that phasing needs to be included as part of the application. I wrote that down.
Right.
I
So-
hear what you're saying, Dan, is, we have a universal service plan, it's for 100%. And then the construction is maybe broken up into 18 to 24 month periods, and we're only funding that portion that's 18 to 24 months,
Right.
right? So it's not like we don't have a whole plan and they couldn't even apply for more, subject to a geographic check.
So what I'm looking into is, okay, so we can only fund you for 18 to 24 months, but you need 24 to 36 months of fiber material because of the long lead time, so we can start gaining insights as to what's coming, banking fiber, preparing for the next rollout, and building more of a,
So it's just when you start the 18 months, like the 18 months start when whatever your long pole in the tent is, right? Like you've received fiber or you have labor
do
on
we
your
just-
contractor.
Or do we just say, like, break it into phases? This is the first amount of funding should be for phase 1 and not set that time.
That doesn't help.
but, so we need to see phase 1, and if they have 10 phases, we'd like to have some insights as to what the other 9 phases are. Otherwise, you can't pre-order fiber,
Yeah,
you
definitely.
can't prep yourself.
Yeah.
Oh, there you
You're
go.
constantly flat-footed, and there are no discounts.
No, we got.
I'm sorry to back up,
No.
just, this all plays together so that we.
Yeah, I did capture that language, so.
So you would approve a construction plan that's much longer and then fund
Yes.
along the way.
And so I think that that makes total sense. The one thing I would say is if the CUDs don't have that information right now, how can we help you?
Right, just. like-
How can we help you? How do we help you get that to that level? Because I think that makes a lot of sense.
Okay, good. I do too.
So for 5, the promoting geographic diversity, did we land that we are only looking at that after the first round of applications?
That's what I wrote down.
Is that?
I mean, and you guys,
Thought we did work.
Yeah,
right, and you guys,
Fastest.
I mean, just as you're evaluating, keep track of where you are, where the CUDs are, what.
Yeah.
Keep track, I don't think you need a working group on that.
Okay,
Okay,
good.
that's good.
So what are the attributes of geographic diversity? It's just north, south, like what is it? How, if we're gonna track it, what are we tracking? Like,
Let them figure it out.
okay, right.
This would also be a nice, great thing to have come in from VCUDA, also some feedback. We'd love
Okay.
Yeah.
We're certainly working on it.
Yeah.
Oh, gosh. So this one is including public broadband assets that can be shared by multiple service providers and can support a variety of purposes. How do we want to address that one, interpret that one? On one hand, they're saying open access. On the other hand, they're saying like, oh, well, you may need this, like agency of transportation might need this, public safety, mobile wireless. Like, we need to evaluate that of how much of this is going to contribute to as we evaluate the applications. So that's more of looking at what the needs are. Somewhat.
I don't get why this isn't just kind of an open access kind of question.
It could be, it's just a question of whether we want to provide more direction or whether we want to have them explain how this helps promote, how this is a public broadband access that promotes a variety of public purposes. We can turn it around on them and do that as well. I just know the questions I'm going to get for interpretation. And that's what I'm seeking from you all is what should I tell when
Yeah.
the frequent flyers write to me asking to interpret this,
I mean, I
this
think
thing, what
you
do
have
I
a good
say?
idea, turn it around and respond. How are they gonna handle that? Some might say we reserve all rights, and others might say it's an open circuit.
I sort of disagree, Patty, and this is why. The way I read the legislation, we're supposed to be helping the CUDs. And I think that in the end, this is the kind of thing that helps set a standard for a statewide network. Like, will there be extra pipe or clear pipe for leasing to others? Will there be pipe for public services?
I already put this in the specification. Maybe Dan and I can work this out. I basically said 144 count fiber, you reserve 1 tube, 12 fibers for safety, 1 tube for growth, and 1 tube for mobile and fixed wireless. And then it's proportional. You drop it down to 48. And there wasn't a lot of there wasn't a lot of resistance to that.
I think that's an outrageous ask, or did
I
they,
don't-
did this?
I think it's a reasonable ask, and I think that I deliberately included that in design specs. So maybe you and I just turn that over to Dan and I.
Okay, I'm just gonna say it's in the design specs.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I also want to ask everybody, should we keep going through this or do we want to, since we're not creating as many working groups, do we want to spread this out to another meeting and go on to a different topic? Like we can, I don't know where we are at time
What do you
wise.
guys need to get
2:44.
done?
What time is it?
Yeah.
It's 2:44. We have VCUDA feedback and then public comment.
Do you need to
time.
talk about pre-purchasing?
Yes,
Yes, we do need
yeah,
to,
that's,
I'm sorry.
we do need to talk about food first. But yeah, I think it's a good idea.
so,
So we're gonna say that we stopped at board shall establish policies.
Yeah, that's a good halfway point.
This is for the right.
So we'll take that.
And Rob and I will go through this again. We got a
With the
little bit,
cleanup.
we got some attention to the board here. So we'll review it again before we come back in.
So when you do, so if you come back with a different version, is there some way to just track?
Yep,
So
sure.
that we're all,
Yep.
just to minimize.
So I just want to say that I really appreciate you guys pulling statute apart and going through this like this, because it's everything. Yeah, it'll help keep us straight. I don't know if explaining it in this format is gonna be great for you in the long run, because it could be a menu of check the box, like, is it shown here, is it shown this way?
Well, I'm actually thinking we come back in with all these yellow and we just, discuss it. We'll come back with, I'm not sure we're gonna need working groups based on what I understand we understand the will of the board now. So that's very helpful.
All right. We're going to table for where we are right now and move to pre-purchasing discussion.
Can I just ask what the objective is for this agenda item?
It's to inform the board of what we're doing.
Um,
It's-
there may-
This was an important item for the,
We likely will need an executive session. There may be something coming out of that executive session that's giving us the ability to proceed.
So you have either a contract matter or a personnel matter.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, but at this, we don't need to start an executive session. We just will likely get there.
yeah, so
It should be only just to rules of
Okay.
executive session, only when there's a matter that will be a detriment to us to disclose to the general
Prematurely.
public.
Yes.
The rest of this that's general, we should stay open.
yeah, and I think I'll talk generally about what we're doing, but then we'll go into the executive session, talk about the specific discussions with those individual groups. So we're exploring different avenues for how the pre-construction. One is working with utilities, for the utilities to help us. The utilities already have established purchasing supply chains. So we have to talk,
Utilities here, you're talking CUDs?
no, electric utilities, they already purchased fiber, they already have established supply lines. So
Not all utilities.
not all, right? Don't, I don't want to talk specifics here. We'll do that in executive session, right? Because none of these have been firmed yet. I just want to form,
So that's one avenue, working with utilities.
the other avenue is to provide funding through a bridge funding through other organizations so that we can get those purchased quickly. Because we don't necessarily have the construction grants approved yet. But I will give you an example of why this is important right now, because we've talked to suppliers who we know we can get materials for about 40% less than, if individual CUDs order on their own, they're going to be paying about 40% more than if we do bulk purchase through the individual suppliers. And we're looking at inventories that are based on 2020 agreements, which will disappear. So we want to act fast on this. So we've been talking to some other groups that can provide bridge funding. So that's an alternative. And we're also, what did I miss? What's the third option?
I think those are the two major options we're dealing with right now. The other challenge we're overcoming is that, so Act 71 gives the board a lot of different powers and missions and things we're supposed to do. But then if you look at the Vermont Community Broadband Fund, it's very specific on what those funds that we have access to can be spent on. There's no catch-all that says anything necessary to accomplish all of these goals. So we're trying to figure out how to deal with a material shortage and help the CUDs get access to the fiber they need to do construction next year.
So where are the CUDs on this? I mean, have they all agreed that they want to order the same stuff?
We've given clear message. The suppliers have said, you can give us 2, maybe 3 stock keeping units, part numbers, but don't be giving us 6 or 8. In one of our initial requests, we got 6 or 8. We're saying, look, you got to get this down to 2 or 3. Yeah, and the debate really becomes a moot point from my standpoint, because they say, well, it's going to cost us so much more if we buy 48. Well, yeah, but you're going to save 40% by going to 48 versus 12 or something like that. So point is, we're in negotiation with the CUDs on this, but it may not even make sense for the CUDs to have these smaller fiber counts if we can get discounts on larger fiber counts.
And Will actually has his hand up right now, but
just very quickly, kind of to confirm Christine's point there. Myself, I'm working with Rob and Christine to talk with the CUDs about this and basically find a consensus among the CUDs that we can agree on maybe 2 or 3 different strand counts and a proportion from which we can make this purchase on. As I'll mention in my comments, we're very keen on this and something we're working on getting the CUDs all on board on for one set of strand counts. Probably just with 2 strand counts, looks like it'll be the optimal pricing.
So we're working through all that. We're working very closely with Bakuda to figure out how much needs to be ordered, when it can be arrived, working with multiple different distributors to see what is available and trying to overcome some of the questions in terms of what the board can do and what we want to involve the state in versus just involving Bakuda. I don't think there's much more we can necessarily say.
Let me add one more thing. We said public safety. The other part is we're working with utilities to see if we can use their storage capability. And we're also looking the vendor to work on, they keep the storage and deliver as needed.
Yes.
From a utility standpoint, electric utility standpoint, that would be a good idea. I don't want to have a spool of fiber in my warehouse and it gets stomped on and
Yeah,
broken.
right. Yeah, of course.
That's a nightmare, accountability wise, inventory counts.
And the goal is to do all this with the least impact possible on our very small staff.
Mhm.
So.
Yeah, so we can go into executive session to discuss the details.
I guess we should just-
Do you have a contractual matter?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, I'll move that we go into executive session due to a contractual matter that would put us at a disadvantage if discussed in open session.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
We are going to go into
Okay, I'm
executive
gonna be
session.
stopping
Do we
the,
get to go to the restroom now?
maybe we'll do a restroom break too.
As part of our executive session.
Okay, I'm muting it right now. And the audio is back on, and we are back.
Okay,
We're back.
just reporting at 3:17, we are out of executive session. Staff will continue to research pre-purchasing activity.
Thank you.
And for the record, Dan Nelson is leaving the meeting at 3:18. Thanks, Dan.
Thank you.
Good luck.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. We're at 3:18. We have public comment at 3:30. Let's move to Vikuda.
Hello. Thank you for having the opportunity to represent the CUDs again before your meeting. I'll start with the pre-purchasing discussion. Obviously, wasn't part of the executive session, but as mentioned before, working with Rob and Christine on this to establish a consensus among CUDs for what would be our optimal purchasing situation. So we're exploring the different options with them. I'm working to get CUDs best as they can, strand counts and mileages ahead of pre-construction. So we're hoping to collaborate to make the best possible decision for purchasing in conjunction with the staff. And also we're discussing how Vikuda as an organization can be beneficial for that purchasing as well. So we talked about this morning with the Vikuda officers. It's something that I'll be bringing to our next meeting on Monday. And again, ongoing process. And once we get more concrete proposals, we'll be able to make some real decisions there. And I think that it'll be in the best interest of all the CUDs. With regard to the policy proposals that have been discussed, I got them from Rob on Friday and began a personal review from the perspective of the CUDs. So I've started to write up, the responses to that. And that's something that I'll be reviewing with representatives from the CUDs themselves, so that we can have a coherent response rather than, just solely off my analysis of the issues.
Will, can you be clear on what policies you're referring, what are you reviewing?
The board packet.
I'm referring
So
to the board
presentation
packet.
was in the board packet.
You
So
mean
the
what we're just going
construction,
over?
yeah,
it was
the
in board
construction
packet
grant
that was posted
program.
on the website.
Okay,
Correct.
thank you.
I'm referring to the proposals that were in the board packets for the construction grants. So we'll be reviewing those with the CUDs to build a coherent response to that from our perspective, with a focus on what's been discussed by you here with the board today. So that's where we're at with Vikuda right now, assessing a number of different options for assisting the CUDs in other ways, with different grants from other agencies and ARPA from towns as well. So we're working with the CUDs right now, as always. We're working on the pre-purchasing issue, and we'll have our responses to these policies moving forward at the October 18th meeting. I also would like to say that with regard to the working groups, I know that's still in the works, but we have volunteers from Vikuda, including myself, to participate in those working groups should they arise, including Kristen Fountain and FX Flynn. So we'd like to be considered for representation in those should that develop as well. So I will, if any questions from me, I'd be happy to take that on now.
Yes, Laura.
Thanks, Will. So I'm interested generally, as you're talking with the CUDs, what are their stress points right now? What's emerging that's kind of got them stressing?
Well, there's certainly, I wouldn't say that the pre-construction grants or the construction grants are a stress point. We're taking, all these meetings in stride and, taking the grant applications in stride. The feedback that has been provided to Maple Broadband has been very, very helpful for reassessing some of the business plans and some of the moves with the pre-construction grants. Really, right now, I would say it's the sense of urgency. There's a sense of urgency for purchasing. There's a major sense of urgency for obtaining ARPA funds from towns, because the CUD thinking right now is that investment now will mean affordability later and as soon as possible. So there's a sense of urgency for investment. We're generally liking the way that the process is moving along for the construction grants and the pre-construction grants. But again, Our priority is just to have everything in line as soon as possible and get construction going. Building the network remains the top priority for CUDs. Affordability is in mind, universal services in mind, but everyone is focused on urgently getting pre-construction in place and then getting construction underway.
Holly has a question.
So, Will, hi. So you mentioned ARPA funding from municipalities. Are you talking about the CUDs going to the municipalities for the municipal share of ARPA? That's question one. And because, towns are getting ARPA money. Or are you talking about the ARPA money that has been allocated to the VCBB? And then, yeah, go ahead.
Please finish your question.
And the second question I had was whether you're aware of any CUDs that are applying for other grants that are, not the VCBB funds.
Well, to answer the first part of your question, I was referring just now to municipal ARPA funds. Obtaining these funds are a priority for all the CUDs. Been working with Christine and the VLCT, the Vermont League of City and Towns, on the messaging for that with CUDs. So we're hoping to kind of increase the collaboration between VCUDA and VLCT in a couple of ways, namely in the messaging for these ARPA funds. And we anticipate some level of success with that. So we're optimistic for those municipal ARPA funds. With regard to the ARPA funds with the VCBB, obviously, this is a top priority for us. Having our say, our representation in the decisions around these grants, but this is information we all know. As for CUDs applying for other grants, CUDs are always looking for other funding sources, especially from federal agencies. There's also a new grant coming down from Commerce and Community Development, but I won't speak to which CUDs are applying to each individual grant, both because I don't always have the full knowledge of where each CUD is at with those applications, and because I'm not sure whether they would want me to market that in this setting.
And just a little background. Well, how many CUDs received USDA funding? Do you know that offhand?
USDA funding in a number of CUDs, I would say, I think 4 or 5 have received grants for rural business development. Beyond that, that's the main source of USDA funding. However, in the coming cycle of USDA grants, I'm planning on helping CUDs pursue funding through community facilities, as I have in the past when I worked for the USDA. And although we didn't have successful funding in that grant in the last cycle, we did have some very high scoring applications, and I anticipate that next time around we might be able to win some serious funding in a lot of areas through the community facilities programs.
There's also 2 NTIA grants coming. So.
The NTIA grants are going to be coming down in the month of November. We're going to know exactly what that looks like. It could really change the landscape for what kind of funding a number of CUDs will need. But I really don't want to speculate on the outcome of those because it could be a very big make or break depending on that. And I also am doing some work to try to influence the outcome of that. But that's for the NTIA.
Well, how much of the CUDs applied for the NTIA?
I don't have the exact number. I know that one CUD in particular is depending on has a big part of their strategy is relying on that NTIA grant. I also know that a larger number of private providers have sought these grants. But I think that that information would be best looked at once the awards are announced.
Holly, you had a question?
Yeah, would it be fair to say, Will, that the CUDs as a municipal district are actually competing with towns for ARPA money then?
Very interesting question, Holly, and this is kind of a discussion that we've had to have internally. There is a natural competition for municipal ARPA funds. So let me try and answer your question. You may need to clarify. There's a natural competition for towns because they have a lot of priorities for what to do with their ARPA money. I mean, water and sewer, namely, is like one of the top priorities for a lot of towns that are receiving these funding. our main strategy is for towns that are looking to make an investment in broadband, that they're going to be looking to the CUDs. All the legislation that the state of Vermont has done for broadband in recent years has been making the CUDs the top priority for how to solve the problem of the digital divide here in Vermont. So there is competition for municipal ARPA funds in general. We think the CUDs are a very competitive target for this funding. We're planning on starting construction next year and completing construction in the coming years, well within ARPA deadlines. So we think that really investment in CUDs is optimal for towns to make. And again, like I mentioned, there's a sense of urgency for CUDs right now to receive this investment. We think that receiving this investment now would make all the difference later, especially in terms of affordability for reducing those rates early on. So there's a competition, but CUDs have a very good case.
Thank you.
Does that answer your question, Holly? Or
Yeah, it just makes it really important that we continue to ask grant applicants where they're getting their funding from.
Any other questions of Will? Will, do you have anything else for us?
No, just to say to keep in touch, to serve as a resource for information on the CUDs. Look forward to coming back on October 18th and continuing to work through some of these policies with more of a consensus from all the CUDs on what's been proposed and discussed today. But thank you again. Thank you for continuing the approval of Maple Broadband's pre-construction, hopefully setting a great precedent for approval of the rest of those. And then onto the construction grants. So thank you very much for letting me represent the CUDs today. And thank you for all the work that you've been doing.
Thanks,
Thank
Will.
you, Will.
Okay. Yes, come on.
I have a question
Question.
about the, and I think I asked, I should have asked about this earlier, but the capital funds money,
Oh, yeah,
we should talk about that at the,
we're gonna apply for those capital funds. I already sent out a message. We want 100 million of it.
yeah,
So
okay. Can we get an update on that maybe next time?
yes.
Is that okay? So that's money that
Capital funds?
it's in the capital, it was in the capital budget that we passed. There's 113 or 118
118 million. We
And,
want 100 million of it.
in funds for state broadband. And so it could be legislative, it could be executive, it could be judiciary. We heard about this at Jai Talk.
These are from the state coffers?
No, these are federal dollars, or it could be one-time funds. I'm not actually sure what the source was, but they came into the capital budget. So that's infrastructure money.
Oh,
for
infrastructure
state-
bill.
Yes. State. Every year, the state has a capital bill and a budget bill and a transportation bill. So the capital bill is for state infrastructure. And so there's funds there. We should get a little brief. Maria Royale gave a little brief at Jai Talk, the Joint IT Oversight Committee. We could send that,
I can forward that to everybody.
yeah, just about those funds.
I thought this was the ARPA capital funds, the 114
I don't know
million.
how it was, I don't know
Okay.
how it was.
Yeah, but you
funded.
still have to apply for it. So
Yeah,
it's
yes,
already- yeah.
and it has to be applied for before the end of the year.
Yeah, there's like you need a very, very general sense by the end.
I tried to go to the website. Didn't
Okay,
have
you'll
the
send an
information.
update. I'm just mindful of 3:30.
Yes.
It's now 3:31 and we want to move over to public comment.
Okay.
We'll do an update next time.
Yeah, that's fine.
Sorry.
Do we have any public comment, I guess?
Will, is your hand still up?
Sorry.
I've said all I have to say for the time being. I'm happy to answer more questions. But I think that my comment will be complete, so I'll pass it on to anyone else from the CUDs or from the public.
I don't see any hands. There might not be any.
Is anybody out in public land who would like to take up public comment? If we don't hear in the next few seconds, we're going to close this action item and move into executive session to talk about staffing.
I note that we haven't addressed our parking
Parking
lot agenda item.
Agreed. All right, hearing no public comment, we're going to close public comment. Thank you, everybody. And let's move on to executive session staffing update.
There's a confidential discussion. I'd
Okay,
like
let's,
to,
let's
Wait.
pause. So are we just gonna end this? for now?
So I need a
Or I'll just-
motion.
need a motion, and
Need a motion.
Rob, I would like to exclude Rob in this discussion.